Listen closely. Can you hear it? The faint, echoing sound of a heavy crown being placed upon a brow, the rustle of silk, and the cool weight of gold. It is the sound of power, absolute and undeniable. For centuries, the world was shaped not by invisible forces, but by the wills of extraordinary individuals who sat upon thrones, commanding armies, building empires, and leaving legacies etched into the very stone of history. Today, we embark on an epic journey, a grand investigation into the lives of 25 of the most powerful kings and queens of old. This is not just a list of names and dates. It is a voyage back through time to stand in the shadow of these monumental figures, to understand the ambition that drove them, the cunning strategies they employed, and the sheer, unyielding force of will that allowed them to command the destiny of millions. Imagine the world as their chessboard, from the sun-baked deserts of ancient Egypt, where pharaohs were worshipped as living gods, to the misty, rugged highlands of Scotland, where warrior queens defied invading legions. From the glittering courts of Europe, where intrigue was a deadly art, to the vast, sprawling empires of the East, where emperors ruled over realms larger than the imagination could easily grasp. Each ruler we will meet possessed a unique brand of power. Some built their legacy on wisdom and law, crafting societies that would endure for 1,000 years. Others wielded power through fear and conquest, their names spoken in whispers long after their deaths, and some held secrets so profound, so shocking, that they have become the stuff of legend, mysteries that historians are still unraveling today. What does it truly mean to hold such immense power, to look upon a map and see not countries but your personal domain? This journey is about more than recounting battles and coronations. It is about exploring the human spirit at its most ambitious, its most brilliant, and sometimes its most terrifying. We will uncover the legendary legacies that continue to echo in our modern world, in our laws, our borders, and our cultures. These are the stories of the rulers who did not merely reign. They transformed everything they touched, so settle in and prepare to step into the halls of power. The annals of history are about to open, and the tales they hold are more incredible than any fiction. Our journey begins not with a king shrouded in the mists of myth, but with a ruler whose impact is etched in stone for all time. Travel back with me to the 18th century before the Common Era, to the bustling, sun-drenched city of Babylon. Here we find King Hammurabi ascending to the throne of a relatively modest kingdom, surrounded by powerful rivals. Through decades of shrewd military campaigns and strategic alliances, he accomplished the unimaginable. He unified the warring city-states of Mesopotamia, forging the first great Babylonian empire. But while his conquests were impressive, they are not why we remember him today. Hammurabi's true, world-changing power was not demonstrated on the battlefield but in the courtroom. His legacy is one of law. Imagine a society where justice was often arbitrary, where the powerful could easily crush the powerless with no written rules to protect them. Hammurabi changed that forever. He ordered his scribes to inscribe nearly 300 laws onto a massive black stone pillar, a stele that would stand publicly for all to see. At the top of this magnificent artifact, which you can see today in the Louvre Museum, is a carved scene of Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the god of justice, receiving the laws directly from the divine. This was a masterstroke of political theater. By claiming divine inspiration, Hammurabi gave his code an authority that no mortal could easily challenge. The principle at the heart of this code is one we still reference today: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. While it sounds harsh to modern ears, in its time, this concept of proportional punishment was revolutionary. It was meant to prevent excessive vengeance, to create a standard where the punishment had to fit the crime. But the Code of Hammurabi went far beyond criminal justice. It was a comprehensive legal framework for an entire civilization. It set wages for laborers, established prices for goods, and outlined rules for trade, creating unprecedented economic stability. It delved into family matters, detailing laws on marriage, divorce, and inheritance, offering a structured, if often unequal, view of societal roles. Yet a profound mystery lingers around this ancient stone text. Was it truly, as Hammurabi proclaimed, a gift from the gods to create a just society? Or was it perhaps one of history's most brilliant tools for control? By creating a single, unified set of laws for his vast and diverse empire, Hammurabi effectively centralized power in his own hand. Every dispute, from a property quarrel to a violent assault, could now be adjudicated based on his royal decree, strengthening his authority in every corner of his realm. The code created order, yes, but it also cemented his control, proving that the most enduring power is often not the power of the sword, but the power of the word. From the written law of Babylon, we now journey to the banks of the Nile, to a land where rulers were not just monarchs but living deities. And here we encounter a figure who shattered one of history's most enduring molds. Around the year 1479 before the Common Era, a woman ascended to the pinnacle of Egyptian power in a way no woman had before or would for centuries to come. Her name was Hatshepsut, and she was not content to rule from the shadows. In a civilization steeped in tradition where the pharaoh was intrinsically male, Hatshepsut performed a breathtaking act of political and religious theater. She crowned herself pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt. Initially, she began her journey to power as a regent. Following the death of her husband, Thutmose II, the throne passed to his young son, Thutmose III, Hatshepsut's stepson. As was customary, she stepped in to guide the kingdom until the boy came of age. But as the years passed, Hatshepsut did not relinquish control. Instead, she orchestrated a gradual, brilliant campaign to legitimize her own permanent rule. She began to be depicted in the full regalia of a male pharaoh. In statues and carvings, she appears with the traditional Nemes headdress, the crook and flail crossed over her chest, and perhaps most strikingly with the ceremonial false beard, a powerful symbol of kingship that left no doubt about her claim to the divine authority of the office. But Hatshepsut's power was not merely about appearances. She was one of ancient Egypt's most prolific builders, commissioning hundreds of construction projects across the nation. Her masterpiece, the magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, is a breathtaking feat of architecture cut directly into the limestone cliffs on the west bank of the Nile. Its elegant, tiered colonnades seem to merge with the very mountain behind it, a stunning statement of harmony between human achievement and the divine landscape. This was not just a tomb, it was a monument to her legacy, a place for her cult to be worshipped for eternity. She also revived lucrative trade routes that had fallen dormant, most famously launching a grand expedition to the fabled land of Punt. Her temple walls are carved with detailed scenes of this voyage, showing ships laden with gold, ebony, ivory, exotic animal skins, and most prized of all, living trees which were successfully transplanted to Egypt. This venture brought immense wealth and rare goods, securing her reign's prosperity and demonstrating her skillful economic leadership. Yet for all her success, a shadow fell over her memory. Decades after her death, a systematic campaign began to erase Hatshepsut from history. Her majestic statues were torn down, smashed, and buried in pits. Her elegant cartouches, the oval rings containing her royal name, were meticulously chiseled off temple walls. Her image was replaced with those of her father, Thutmose I, or her stepson, Thutmose III. For centuries, she vanished from the historical record. This act of damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, presents us with one of Egyptology's greatest whodunits. The prime suspect has long been Thutmose III, the stepson she seemingly supplanted. Was this an act of long-simmering vengeance, a bitter man finally erasing the woman who had stolen his throne for 20 years? But the story may be more complex. The destruction did not begin immediately after Hatshepsut's death. It started much later, toward the end of Thutmose III's own long and successful reign. This timing suggests the motive may have been less about personal hatred and more about political necessity. By that time, Thutmose III's own son, Amenhotep II, was being groomed for power. To ensure a smooth succession and reinforce the unbroken male line of descent, it may have been deemed crucial to remove the potentially destabilizing precedent of a powerful female pharaoh. Erasing Hatshepsut was a way to tidy up the official history, to reaffirm that the throne was inherently a masculine domain. Her crime, in the eyes of those who came after, may not have been that she was a bad ruler, but that she was a phenomenally successful one who broke all the rules, proving that a woman could wield the power of a god-king as effectively as any man. From the rigid traditions of Egypt, we now travel east to the vast, windswept plains of Persia, where a different kind of ruler forged an empire not just by conquest, but by a revolutionary idea. Here we meet Cyrus II of Persia, a man history would remember by a title he truly earned, Cyrus the Great. In the 6th century before the Common Era, he rose from a regional king to the architect of the world's first superpower, the Achaemenid Persian Empire. His methods of empire building were so advanced, so contrary to the brutal norms of the ancient world, that they would influence leaders for millennia. Cyrus's military genius was undeniable. He first secured his power base in Persia and then turned his attention to the dominant powers of the region. His campaign against the wealthy King Croesus of Lydia is the stuff of legend. Faced with Croesus's formidable cavalry, Cyrus displayed brilliant tactical innovation. He ordered his camels to be placed at the front of his lines. The unfamiliar sight and smell of these animals spooked the Lydian horses, causing chaos and disarray, allowing Cyrus's infantry to achieve a decisive victory. Later, he set his sights on the grand prize, Babylon itself. By this time, the Neo-Babylonian Empire was weakening from within, its king, Nabonidus, unpopular with the powerful priestly class. Cyrus did not need to lay a lengthy siege. He diverted the waters of the Euphrates River, allowing his troops to march along the riverbed and enter the city through its undefended water gates. In a single night, the mighty city of Hammurabi fell, but the true source of Cyrus's enduring power was not his military prowess, it was his unprecedented policy of tolerance. While other conquerors, like the Assyrians before him, ruled through terror, deporting entire populations and crushing local cultures, Cyrus adopted a radically different approach. He presented himself not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. This philosophy is immortalized on a small, barrel-shaped clay object known as the Cyrus cylinder. Often called the world's first charter of human rights, the cylinder records how, after capturing Babylon, Cyrus restored the city's temples and, most famously, permitted all the displaced peoples held captive by the Babylonians to return to their homelands. For the Jewish people, this was a moment of profound significance. After decades of exile, they were allowed to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. In the Hebrew Bible, Cyrus is hailed as a Messiah, the anointed one of God. This policy of cultural and religious respect was a masterstroke of governance. By allowing conquered peoples to maintain their customs and worship their own gods, he secured their loyalty, reducing the constant threat of rebellion that plagued other empires. It made the Persian Empire remarkably stable and manageable. However, this noble legacy presents us with a compelling historical mystery. Was Cyrus truly a benevolent liberator, or was this simply the most effective propaganda campaign of the ancient world? The reality is that his tolerance was also a brilliantly pragmatic strategy. An empire that stretches from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea cannot be held together by force alone. By portraying himself as a restorer of order and a respecter of gods, He co-opted the local elites and priesthoods, turning potential enemies into willing administrators of his own vast domain. The Cyrus cylinder, while remarkable, was also a piece of political messaging designed for Babylonian audiences to legitimize his rule. So we are left with a dual image, a ruler who could be both genuinely merciful and ruthlessly pragmatic, understanding that the strongest chains binding an empire together are not always made of iron. The end of Cyrus's life is shrouded in equal parts mystery and epic drama. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Cyrus met his death on the windswept steppes of Central Asia in a final, brutal confrontation with Tomiris, the warrior queen of the Massagetae. Herodotus recounts a tale of cunning and vengeance, after Cyrus tricked and captured Tomiris's son, who subsequently killed himself. The queen vowed revenge. In the fierce battle that followed, the Persian army was defeated and Cyrus himself was slain. Tomiris, the story goes, found his body, decapitated him, and plunged his head into a wineskin filled with blood, declaring, "I promised to give you your fill of blood, and now I give it to you." It is a powerful, grisly image that has captured the imagination for centuries. Yet, historians debate the accuracy of this account. Other sources suggest he died peacefully or in a different campaign. The true circumstances of his death remain one of history's unresolved enigmas, a fittingly dramatic end for a figure of such monumental stature. Cyrus the Great left behind an empire and a model of kingship that would inspire figures from Alexander the Great to the founding fathers of the United States, a complex legacy of power wielded with both an iron fist and an unexpected, revolutionary open hand. The story of Cyrus the Great's demise, as told by Herodotus, introduces us to one of history's most formidable and enigmatic figures, Queen Tomiris of the Massagetae. She was the ruler of a confederation of nomadic tribes inhabiting the vast, arid steppes of Central Asia, a world away from the structured empires of the Near East. Her power was not derived from stone palaces or written codes of law, but from her leadership over a people renowned for their fierce independence and equestrian prowess. The conflict with Cyrus, therefore, was more than a simple border clash. It was a collision of two entirely different worlds, the centralized, expansionist empire against the decentralized, mobile power of the steppes. The legend of her victory is a stark reminder that the ambition of even the greatest emperors could be checked by a determined and brilliant commander. According to the ancient accounts, Cyrus initially attempted to win through deception rather than direct force. He proposed marriage to Tomiris, a transparent ploy to acquire her kingdom through union. When she saw through this ruse and refused, he set a more elaborate trap. He feigned a retreat, leaving behind a camp stocked with strong wine and a small, vulnerable-looking force. The Massagetae, unaccustomed to wine, attacked the camp, became intoxicated, and were easily slaughtered by Cyrus's main army waiting in ambush. Among the captives was Tomiris's own son, who, upon regaining his senses and realizing his shame, took his own life. This tragic event triggered a fury that would reshape history. Tomiris sent a challenge to Cyrus, vowing to give him his fill of blood. In the colossal battle that followed, Herodotus claims the Massagetae triumphed. Cyrus was killed, and Tomiris, finding his body, fulfilled her gruesome oath by plunging his severed head into a wineskin filled with blood. This narrative, while likely heavily embellished, is profoundly significant. It portrays a woman who operates on a plane of absolute moral clarity, avenging her son and defending her people's freedom with a ferocity that meets and exceeds that of the great king himself. The story served as a cautionary tale for the Greeks who recorded it, a powerful symbol of the dangers of hubris and the unpredictable strength that could rise from the margins of the known world. While the precise historical details may be lost, the legacy of Tomiris endures as a powerful archetype of the warrior queen, a figure who commanded respect through martial prowess and unwavering principle in a domain almost exclusively dominated by men. Her story forces us to question how history remembers powerful women. Often, they are depicted either as monstrous vindictive figures or as noble defenders, but rarely with the complex humanity afforded to their male counterparts. Tomarus exists for us primarily through this single, epic episode of vengeance, her entire reign condensed into one legendary confrontation. Yet, her victory over Cyrus cemented her place in history as a symbol of resistance, a ruler who proved that the spirit of independence could withstand the most powerful armies on earth. The death of Cyrus the Great created a power vacuum that threatened to unravel his vast empire. Rebellions erupted across the lands he had conquered, and the very stability he had built through tolerance seemed on the verge of collapse. Into this chaos stepped a nobleman named Darius, a distant relative of the royal house, who would become known as Darius the Great. His rise to power was itself shrouded in controversy and bold assertion. Darius claimed that a usurper named Gaumata had seized the throne by pretending to be Bardia, the murdered brother of Cyrus's son and successor. According to Darius's own account, he, with the aid of 6 other noble conspirators, slew the impostor and rightfully claimed the kingship for himself. What followed was not a peaceful transition, but a grueling year of military campaigns across the empire, as Darius fought 19 battles against 9 rebellious kings to reaffirm Persian control. This period of intense conflict demonstrated his immense determination and skill as a military leader, but his true genius lay in organization. Once the empire was secure, Darius embarked on one of the most ambitious administrative overhauls in ancient history. He understood that to govern a territory of such immense scale and diversity, a new system was needed. His solution was the creation of the satrapy system. He divided the empire into approximately 20 provinces, each called a satrapy, and appointed a governor or satrap to administer it. These officials were often drawn from local noble families, a clever tactic that incorporated existing power structures and fostered loyalty. Each satrapy was responsible for paying a fixed annual tribute in silver to the imperial treasury, creating a predictable and immense source of wealth. To ensure the satraps did not become too powerful, Darius separated military and civilian authority within the provinces and created a network of royal inspectors, known as the eyes and ears of the king, who traveled the empire reporting directly back to him. This sophisticated system of checks and balances allowed the Achaemenid Empire to function efficiently for nearly 2 centuries, a testament to Darius's visionary statecraft. To bind this sprawling domain together, Darius commissioned an infrastructure project of breathtaking ambition, the Royal Road, stretching over 1,600 miles from the capital of Susa in Persia to the city of Sardis near the Aegean coast. This highway was a marvel of engineering. It featured way stations with fresh horses for royal messengers, guard posts for security, and inns for travelers. This network allowed information, troops, and trade to move across the empire with unprecedented speed. A royal messenger could travel the entire length of the road in just 9 days, a journey that would have taken months otherwise. The Royal Road was the circulatory system of the empire, and it facilitated an era of economic and cultural exchange that shaped the ancient world. It was this same road that would later enable Darius to launch his invasion of Greece, setting the stage for the legendary conflicts at Marathon and Thermopylae. But how did Darius ensure that his version of events, his rightful ascent to the throne, would be the one that endured? His answer was carved into the face of a mountain. High on a cliff overlooking a major road in modern-day Iran, Darius commissioned the Behistun inscription. This monumental relief is both a work of art and a powerful piece of propaganda. It depicts Darius larger than life, with his foot on the chest of the supposed usurper Gaumata. Behind them stand the 6 loyal nobles who aided him, and before him a line of 9 defeated rebel kings, their necks bound by ropes. The scene is accompanied by a lengthy text repeated in 3 different languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. It narrates in meticulous detail Darius's account of his rise to power and his suppression of the rebellions. The inscription presents a fascinating historical puzzle. Its primary purpose was unambiguous: to legitimize Darius's rule and present it as the will of the supreme god Ahura Mazda. But how much of it is historical fact, and how much is a carefully crafted narrative designed to justify a coup? The fact that Darius felt the need to so forcefully and publicly justify his actions suggests that his claim to the throne may have been more contested than he admitted. By inscribing his story in multiple languages on an inaccessible cliff face, a place where it could be seen by travelers but not altered by enemies, he was making a permanent divine claim to authority. For centuries, the true meaning of the inscription was lost, its languages forgotten. It was only deciphered in the 19th century, and in a remarkable twist of fate, the Behistun inscription became the Rosetta Stone of cuneiform script, allowing scholars to unlock the written records of ancient Mesopotamia. Thus, Darius's monument to his own power ultimately became the key to understanding the very civilizations that preceded him. Our journey now takes us from the sprawling Persian Empire to the ancient civilizations of Asia, where two colossal figures rose to power with a similar ambition: to unify vast lands under a single banner, but who pursued that goal with philosophies so different they seemed to exist on opposite ends of the human spectrum. In the East, we find Ashoka, an Indian emperor whose name would become synonymous with peace, and in the West, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, a ruler whose legacy is etched in both stone and terror. Their stories offer a profound study in contrast, a tale of two paths to power and the vastly different legacies they left behind. First, let us travel to the Indian subcontinent in the 3rd century before the Common Era, to the court of the Mauryan Empire. Ashoka was not initially the gentle sage of legend. He was a prince of fierce ambition who, according to some accounts, fought his way to the throne over the bodies of his brothers. As a young emperor, he embarked on a campaign of violent expansion, extending the borders of his empire with relentless military force. The turning point in his life, and one of the most significant moments in world history, was the Kalinga War. Kalinga was a prosperous and independent region on the east coast of India, and Ashoka was determined to conquer it. The conflict was unspeakably bloody. Historical accounts suggest that 100,000 soldiers were slain, and many hundreds of thousands more civilians were displaced or perished. The river running by the battlefield was said to have run red with blood. Victory, when it came, brought Ashoka not a sense of triumph, but a profound and soul-shattering emptiness. Touring the devastated field after the battle, he was overcome with remorse and horror at the suffering he had caused. The sheer scale of the death and misery became a spiritual crisis. This moment of transformative anguish led him to renounce violence and embrace the teachings of Buddhism. He underwent a conversion so complete that it reshaped his entire approach to governance. The ruthless conqueror became a compassionate ruler, dedicating his life to Dhamma, a philosophy of moral and social responsibility, non-violence, tolerance, and compassion for all living beings. But Ashoka was not a passive philosopher. He was an emperor, and he used the full machinery of state power to propagate his new beliefs. His method of communication was as enduring as it was brilliant. He had his edicts carved onto massive stone pillars and rock faces across his vast empire, from the mountains of Afghanistan to the jungles of southern India. These were not royal decrees in the traditional sense. They were public instructions on ethical living. They preached respect for parents, generosity towards friends and priests, abstinence from killing animals, and most importantly, religious tolerance for all sects. He appointed special officials, the Dhamma Mahamatas, to promote these values and look after the welfare of the people. In one particularly moving edict, he expressed his deep regret for the Kalinga War and declared that his only conquests from that day forward would be conquests by righteousness. Ashoka's power transformed from the power of the sword to the power of the message. a radical experiment in moral leadership that would influence the spiritual landscape of Asia for millennia. Now, let us cross the Himalayas into China, where a very different kind of unifier was at work just a few decades later. Yingzheng, the king of Qin, pursued unification with a terrifying and singular focus. In a series of relentless campaigns between 230 and 221 before the Common Era, he defeated the 6 other major warring states, bringing China together under his rule for the first time in history. He declared himself Qin Shi Huangdi, the first August Emperor of Qin. His philosophy was not one of compassion, but of legalism, a school of thought that advocated for absolute state power maintained through a strict system of rewards and harsh, unforgiving punishments. Dissent was not tolerated. To crush opposing ideologies, he infamously ordered the burning of books and the burying of scholars, destroying philosophical texts from rival schools like Confucianism, and executing hundreds of intellectuals who challenged his authority. Yet for all his brutality, Qin Shi Huang was a monumental administrator. He understood that to hold his new empire together, he needed to standardize everything. He mandated a single system of writing so that decrees from the capital could be understood in every province. He standardized weights, measures, and even the axle lengths of carts so that all roads would have uniform ruts. He connected existing fortifications to create the first version of the Great Wall, a massive project defended by countless laborers who died during its construction. His reign was a paradox of immense cruelty and breathtaking innovation, a forced march toward progress that consolidated a Chinese identity which has endured for over 2,000 years. But beneath this driven exterior lay a deep and consuming fear, the fear of death. Qin Shi Huang became obsessed with finding the secret to immortality, dispatching expeditions to far-off lands in search of elixirs of life. When these quests failed, he turned his attention to the next best thing, preparing an afterlife kingdom worthy of his power. This obsession gave birth to the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century, his subterranean tomb complex guarded by the Terracotta Army. Discovered by farmers in 1974, the site revealed thousands of life-sized, meticulously crafted clay soldiers, each with unique facial features arranged in battle formation. There are infantrymen, archers, cavalrymen, and chariots, an entire imperial guard frozen in time. The excavated pits, however, are merely the outskirts of the main event. The emperor's actual tomb mound, a large, grass-covered hill, remains unexcavated to this day. Ancient writings by the historian Sima Qian describe a breathtaking microcosm inside, a map of the empire with rivers of flowing mercury, a ceiling inlaid with pearls to represent the stars, and booby traps set to kill any intruder. Modern scientific surveys have indeed detected unusually high concentrations of mercury in the soil around the mound, lending eerie credibility to these 2,000-year-old accounts. This presents one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. What unparalleled treasures and secrets lie within? The Chinese government, citing both respect for the dead and the immense technical challenges of preserving whatever is inside, has chosen to leave the tomb undisturbed. For now, the first emperor rests in his palatial underground domain, his silent terracotta legion standing watch, protecting secrets that have yet to see the light of day. The contrast between these two rulers could not be starker. One ultimately sought peace and spiritual enlightenment, memorializing his philosophy on pillars for all to see. The other sought eternal power, building a secret, silent army to guard his legacy for eternity. Leaving behind the sealed tomb of China's first emperor, our focus shifts westward to a young king whose ambition burned so brightly it illuminated the entire known world in just over a decade. In the late 4th century before the Common Era, a 20-year-old prince named Alexander ascended the throne of Macedon, a kingdom on the northern fringe of Greece that his father, Philip II, had forged into a formidable military power. The Greek city-states, viewing the new king as little more than an upstart boy, immediately rebelled. Alexander's response was swift and terrifying. He marched south, besieged and utterly destroyed the city of Thebes as a brutal example, and cowed the rest of Greece into submission. With his rear secured, he could turn his attention to his father's dream, an invasion of the colossal Persian Empire, the ancient superpower that had once threatened Greece itself. What followed was not merely a military campaign. It was a lightning-fast redrawing of the world map, a conquest of unprecedented scale and speed that would earn its architect the title the Great. Alexander's genius was a blend of his father's tactical innovations and his own unparalleled audacity. He led from the front, a charismatic and often reckless figure who shared the hardships of his soldiers, earning their fierce loyalty. His army, though vastly outnumbered in almost every engagement, moved with incredible speed and struck with overwhelming force. The key to his success was his masterful use of the companion cavalry, an elite heavy horseman unit that acted as a hammer against the anvil of his disciplined phalanx of infantrymen with their long spears called sarissas. This combined arms approach was devastatingly effective. At the Battle of Issus, he personally led a cavalry charge that broke through the Persian lines and sent the Emperor Darius III fleeing from the field, abandoning his own family to capture. He then marched his army along the coast of the Levant, strategically capturing every Persian naval base to deny his enemy a fleet. His most famous siege was at the island city of Tyre, where he built a massive causeway to reach the seemingly impregnable fortress, a stunning feat of engineering and determination that took 7 months to complete. But Alexander's vision extended far beyond simple conquest. After seizing Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule and declared a pharaoh, he founded the city of Alexandria, which would become a legendary center of learning. Then he marched deep into the heart of the Persian Empire, capturing its ceremonial capitals of Persepolis and finally pursuing the fleeing Darius. When he found the great king murdered by his own satraps, Alexander did something extraordinary. He gave Darius a royal funeral and declared himself his legitimate successor. This was a profound shift. He began to adopt Persian dress and court customs, integrating Persian nobles into his administration, and even arranging a mass marriage between his Macedonian officers and Persian noblewomen. This policy of fusion, of attempting to blend Greek and Persian cultures into a unified ruling class, was visionary, but it also alienated many of his Macedonian companions who saw it as a betrayal of their own heritage. His ambition seemed limitless. After consolidating the entire Persian Empire, he pushed ever eastward into the unknown lands of India, winning a hard-fought battle against King Porus and his war elephants. It was only at the Hyphosis River that his weary, homesick army finally refused to go any further, forcing the greatest conqueror the world had known to turn back. The end came with shocking suddenness. Back in Babylon in the year 323 before the Common Era, at the age of just 32, Alexander fell ill after a series of banquets. What began as a fever rapidly worsened, and within days, the man who had carved an empire from the Adriatic to the Indus was dead. The mystery of his death is one of history's greatest unsolved cases. Was it a natural cause? Suggestions have included malaria, typhoid fever, or the complications from an old battle wound that finally caught up with him. Others point to his legendary consumption of alcohol, raising the possibility of poisoning, either by a disgruntled Macedonian general or by a rival faction. The lack of a clear successor meant that his death did not bring peace but unleashed a tidal wave of chaos. His empire, held together solely by the force of his personality, fractured almost immediately. His senior generals, known as the Diadochi or successors, turned on each other in a series of brutal conflicts called the Wars of the Diadochi, carving up his domain into smaller Hellenistic kingdoms that would fight for centuries. And then there is the final, enduring mystery of Alexander's physical legacy, his lost tomb. His body, initially placed in a magnificent golden sarcophagus, became a political prize. One of his generals, Ptolemy, hijacked the funeral cortege, taking it back to Macedon and brought it to Egypt, where it was eventually interred in a grand mausoleum in the city he founded, Alexandria. For centuries, this tomb was a site of pilgrimage for Roman emperors and other powerful figures, including Julius Caesar and Octavian, who later became Augustus. But then, sometime in the 3rd or 4th century of the Common Era, the tomb's location was lost. Earthquakes, rising sea levels, and urban reconstruction buried it. Despite numerous modern expeditions and theories pointing to various locations beneath the modern city, the final resting place of Alexander the Great remains one of archaeology's most sought-after and elusive prizes, a ghostly echo of a king whose vast earthly domain stands in stark contrast to the complete disappearance of his mortal remains. While Alexander's empire fractured and his final resting place was lost to time, his legacy cast a long shadow over the Mediterranean world, particularly in the kingdom he had founded in Egypt. There, 3 centuries later, a queen would ascend to the throne who would master the art of political survival in the face of an even greater power than Persia, Rome. Her name was Cleopatra VII, and her story is so entwined with myth and romantic tragedy that it can be difficult to separate the formidable ruler from the legend. She was the last active pharaoh of ancient Egypt, a woman whose intelligence and political cunning were her true weapons in a desperate and ultimately doomed struggle to preserve her kingdom's independence. To understand Cleopatra, we must first look past the Hollywood image. She was not an Egyptian by blood, but a Macedonian Greek, a descendant of Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals who seized control of Egypt after the empire's collapse. The Ptolemaic dynasty had ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years, yet they often remained aloof from their subjects, speaking Greek and maintaining their Hellenistic customs. Cleopatra broke this mold completely. She was a scholar and a linguist, fluent in at least 9 languages. Most significantly, she was the first in her royal line to actually bother learning the Egyptian language. This was not a trivial accomplishment, it was a profound political statement. By being able to speak directly with her priests, officials, and people in their native tongue, she connected with the powerful religious institutions and the populace in a way her predecessors never had. She actively presented herself not as a foreign queen, but as the reincarnation of the goddess Isis, a brilliant piece of theological branding that solidified her divine right to rule in the eyes of the Egyptians. This intellectual prowess defined her reign. When her younger brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIII, and his courtiers attempted to depose her, Cleopatra did not surrender. She raised an army, but she also understood that a military victory alone was unlikely. The real power now resided in Rome, a republic descending into civil war. Seeing an opportunity, she orchestrated one of the most audacious meetings in history with the victorious Roman general, Julius Caesar. The tales of her arrival in Alexandria are legendary, smuggled into the royal palace, rolled inside a luxurious carpet to be unfurled at the feet of the most powerful man in the Roman world. This dramatic entrance was a masterclass in stagecraft, ensuring an unforgettable first impression. Caesar, a man 3 decades her senior, was captivated. More than just a romantic entanglement, their alliance was a strategic partnership. With Caesar's military might, Cleopatra was restored to the throne. Their relationship produced a son, Caesarion, or Little Caesar, a living symbol of a union that could potentially bind Rome and Egypt together. After Caesar's assassination in 44 before the Common Era, the Roman world was once again plunged into conflict. Cleopatra, now ruling alongside another young brother, Ptolemy XIV, carefully navigated the shifting tides. The power in Rome eventually settled into a fragile alliance between Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, and his trusted lieutenant, Mark Antony. When Antony summoned the rulers of the eastern provinces to Tarsus to account for their loyalties, Cleopatra arrived not as a supplicant but as a sovereign equal. She sailed into the harbor on a magnificent barge with a gilded stern and purple sails, dressed as the goddess Venus. Once again, she used spectacle to assert her power and command the situation. Antony, a soldier known for his appetites and ambition, was utterly charmed. Their partnership became both personal and political. For Antony, Cleopatra provided the vast wealth and resources of Egypt to fund his military campaigns and his rivalry with Octavian. For Cleopatra, Antony was the sword that could protect Egypt, expand its territories, and perhaps even help her secure a shared rule over the entire Roman East for her children. This brings us to one of the most persistent mysteries surrounding Cleopatra. For 2,000 years, she has been synonymous with devastating beauty. But what did she truly look like? Contemporary coin portraits, which are likely the most accurate representations we have, show a woman with a prominent nose, a strong chin, and deep-set eyes, striking and intelligent, but not conforming to a conventional standard of beauty. The Roman poets writing propaganda for Octavian mocked her appearance. So, if her power did not stem from Hollywood perfect features, where did it lie? The ancient historian Plutarch provides the most insightful answer. He wrote that her true allure was in her irresistible charm, the persuasiveness of her conversation, and the character that attended her every word. Her voice, he noted, was like a multi-stringed instrument. It was her brilliant mind, her wit, and her commanding presence that captivated the most powerful men of her age. Her beauty was not a passive quality, it was an active force, a product of her formidable intellect and charisma. The final act of Cleopatra's life is a drama of Shakespearean proportions. Her alliance with Antony culminated in a disastrous defeat at the naval battle of Actium in 31 before the Common Era, where Octavian's fleet outmaneuvered and crushed their combined forces. Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Alexandria, where Octavian's legions pursued them. With all hope lost, and rather than be paraded through the streets of Rome as a trophy in Octavian's triumph, Cleopatra chose to take control of her own narrative one final time. She retreated to her mausoleum and, according to the most famous account, committed suicide by allowing an asp, a venomous Egyptian cobra, to bite her. This method was deeply symbolic. The asp was associated with royalty and the sun god, a means of achieving immortality and asserting her divine status even in death. But is this the true story? Some ancient sources suggest she may have used a hidden pin or a poisonous cocktail. The asp story is poetic and powerful, but it has its problems. How would a snake have been smuggled past Octavian's guards? An alternative theory proposes that she used a mixture of poisons, which would have been a far more practical and controlled method for a woman known for her knowledge of potions and toxins. Whatever the precise method, her death was a deliberate, calculated act. It was the final move of a master strategist, denying her enemy his ultimate prize and choosing a queen's death over a captive's life. With her died the Ptolemaic dynasty. Octavian had her son, Caesarion, executed, and Egypt was annexed as a province of the Roman Empire, ending 3,000 years of pharaonic rule. Cleopatra's legacy is a complex tapestry of brilliant statecraft, relentless ambition, and a tragic love story, a testament to a woman who used every ounce of her intelligence and charm to defy the inevitable march of an empire. The fall of Cleopatra and Mark Antony did more than just annex Egypt. It cleared the stage for the final act in the transformation of the Roman Republic. The victor of that civil war, Octavian, stood as the undisputed master of the Roman world. Yet, the very title of king was a cursed word in Rome, evoking memories of the tyrannical Tarquins overthrown centuries earlier. The Republic, with its senatorial debates and shared power, was a cherished ideal, even if it had been crumbling for decades under the weight of military strongmen like Sulla and Julius Caesar. Octavian faced a problem of breathtaking complexity: how to seize absolute power without ever appearing to do so. His solution was a political masterpiece of subtlety and stagecraft that would redefine Western governance for centuries. He would become Augustus Caesar, the first Roman emperor, a ruler who wrapped autocracy in the respectable robes of tradition. His first and most brilliant move was what historians call the First Settlement of 27 before the Common Era. Instead of demanding a crown, the 28-year-old Octavian appeared before the Senate and dramatically resigned all his extraordinary powers. He professed a desire to restore the Republic to its former glory. This was, of course, a carefully calculated performance. The Senate, filled with his supporters and well aware of the legions at his back, promptly begged him to reconsider. They then granted him a new name, Augustus, meaning the revered one, and a package of powers that were republican in form but monarchical in fact. He held the consulship repeatedly, but more importantly, he was given imperium proconsulare meius, supreme command over all of Rome's armies, and tribunicia potestas, the inviolable power of a tribune which made his person sacrosanct. In public, he was merely the princeps, the first citizen. In reality, he controlled the military, the treasury, and the political process. He had learned from his great-uncle Julius's fate. It was safer to be called Augustus than dictator for life. This delicate balancing act extended to every aspect of his rule. He launched a massive propaganda campaign that celebrated a return to the old ways. He restored crumbling temples, passed laws promoting marriage and childbearing, and presented himself as the pious guardian of Roman religion and virtue. Poets like Virgil and Horace, under his patronage, produced works that linked his reign to a new golden age, a divine destiny for Rome. The Aeneid, for instance, famously traced the lineage of Augustus back to the Trojan hero Aeneas and the goddess Venus, legitimizing his rule through epic poetry. At the same time, he was quietly amassing a personal fortune that dwarfed the state treasury, allowing him to fund public works, pay the army bonuses, and essentially run the empire as his private estate. He became the patron of all patrons, binding the entire ruling class to him through financial dependency. This era, known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, was indeed a time of unprecedented stability, security, and cultural flourishing throughout the Mediterranean. But this peace was built on the unshakable foundation of one man's absolute control. Yet, even the most meticulously crafted power structure could be shaken by events on the distant frontier. For Augustus, the most profound shock came from the dark, untamed forests of Germania. His grand strategy was to push the empire's border from the Rhine River eastward to the Elbe, thereby shortening the frontier and incorporating a vast new territory. To lead this effort, he appointed Publius Quinctilius Varus, a trusted administrator but a man known more for his harsh taxation than his military genius. In the year 9 of the Common Era, Varus was leading 3 legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, along with auxiliary troops, some 20,000 men in total, on a routine march to summer quarters. What happened next became the stuff of nightmare for Rome. They were led into a trap by Arminius, a chieftain of the Cherusci tribe who had been raised in Rome as a hostage and served as an officer in the Roman auxiliary forces. Arminius was the ultimate insider threat. He knew Roman tactics intimately and used that knowledge to orchestrate a devastating ambush in the dense, rain-soaked Teutoburg forest. The Roman column, stretched out for miles and encumbered by a baggage train, was unable to form their disciplined battle lines on the narrow, muddy paths. For 3 days, Germanic warriors harried them from the cover of the woods, wiping out the entire force to the last man. When news of the catastrophe reached the 70-year-old Augustus, it is said he was beside himself with grief, wandering his palace and crying out, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." The psychological impact was seismic. The loss of 3 elite legions, a tenth of Rome's entire military strength, was a humiliation that halted Roman expansion into Germania forever. The Rhine River would remain the permanent border. The mystery that haunts historians to this day is the precise location of the battle. For centuries, the site was lost until major archaeological finds near Kalkris in Germany in the late 1980s revealed a grisly scene: Roman coins, weapons, and even bones with combat wounds, confirming the grim reality of the ancient accounts. The Teutoburg forest became a ghost that haunted Augustus's final years, a stark reminder that even the most powerful emperor could not control the chaotic forces beyond the frontier. This disaster underscored the emperor's most persistent and personal anxiety, the question of succession. Having ended the Republic, Augustus now faced the problem of all monarchs: how to ensure a smooth transfer of power. This was a deeply personal tragedy for him, as he outlived nearly every one of his chosen heirs. His first hope was his beloved nephew and son-in-law Marcellus, who died young. Then he turned to his loyal friend and general Agrippa, who married his daughter Julia. Agrippa also predeceased him. His grandsons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar, whom he adopted as his own sons, also died before coming of age. With his dynastic plans in ruins, Augustus was forced to turn to his last resort: his stepson Tiberius, the dour and reluctant son of his wife Livia from her previous marriage. Tiberius was a capable general but had no desire for the throne. Augustus eventually adopted him, but the relationship was strained and lacked the affection he had held for his biological heirs. In the end, the system he created, the Principate, depended entirely on the character of the man at the top. By forcing the succession upon Tiberius, Augustus ensured the continuation of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, but he also bequeathed to Rome a model of imperial power that would prove catastrophically unstable whenever a weak or cruel heir took the throne. The restorer of peace had, in his ingenious quest for permanent control, created a system whose greatest weakness was the very thing he sought to secure: the man who would come next. The death of Augustus and the eventual passing of his reluctant successor, Tiberius, set the stage for a series of emperors whose reigns would test the very foundations of the imperial system Augustus had so carefully constructed. The Julio-Claudian dynasty would produce figures of legendary infamy like Caligula and Nero, whose excesses and cruelties pushed the empire to the brink. But as the 3rd century of the Common Era gave way to the 4th, the Roman world was gripped by a crisis far more existential than the whims of a single mad emperor. It was an age of constant civil war, where legions proclaimed their own generals as emperor with alarming frequency, while barbarian invasions pressed on every frontier. The empire seemed to be tearing itself apart. Into this maelstrom of chaos stepped a soldier emperor whose decisions would not only save the empire but fundamentally redirect the course of Western civilization. His name was Constantine, and history would remember him as Constantine the Great. The path to his ultimate power was forged in the fires of civil conflict. Following the collapse of the Tetrarchy, a system of rule by 4 emperors established by Diocletian to bring stability, Constantine found himself one of several rivals vying for control. The pivotal moment came in the year 312, on the eve of a decisive battle at the Milvian Bridge, just outside the city of Rome. His opponent was Maxentius, who held the city. According to the accounts written by the Christian bishop Eusebius, who claimed to have heard the story from Constantine himself, the emperor witnessed a miraculous sign in the sky around midday: a cross of light above the sun, accompanied by the Greek words Epsilon nu tau omicron upsilon tau letter 1 ff3 nu iota kappa alpha. In this sign conquer. That night, Eusebius relates, Christ appeared to Constantine in a dream and instructed him to place the heavenly symbol on the shields and standards of his army. The symbol was the Chi-Rho, formed by the first 2 Greek letters of the word Christ. Constantine obeyed, and the next day his forces, though outnumbered, achieved a stunning victory. Maxentius drowned in the Tiber while attempting to flee, and Constantine entered Rome as its sole master in the West. This moment is one of the most debated and consequential in all of history. Was it a genuine religious vision, a moment of divine intervention that converted a pagan emperor, or was it a brilliantly calculated piece of political theater? To understand the weight of this decision, we must remember the context. Just a decade earlier, Christians had been brutally persecuted under Emperor Diocletian in the last and largest of the Roman purges. They were a significant but scattered minority, often viewed with suspicion for their refusal to worship the traditional Roman gods. By aligning himself with their god, Constantine was making a radical bet. Some historians suggest he may have been appealing to the growing organizational strength and fervent loyalty of the Christian communities, seeing in them a powerful unifying force for his fragmented empire. Whatever the true nature of his vision, the outcome was undeniable. The following year, in 313, Constantine and his co-emperor in the east, Licinius, issued the Edict of Milan, which officially legalized Christianity and granted religious tolerance to all faiths throughout the empire. It did not make Christianity the state religion that would come later, but it ended the persecutions and began a process that would see the faith transformed from a persecuted sect into the dominant religious and cultural power of Europe. Constantine's revolution, however, was not solely spiritual. He understood that the city of Rome, with its deeply entrenched pagan aristocracy and memories of the old republic, was a difficult place from which to rule a transformed empire. The true centers of power and threat had shifted eastward toward the wealthy provinces of Asia and the volatile Persian frontier. And so he undertook a project of breathtaking ambition, the creation of an entirely new capital, a Christian Rome from its very foundation. He chose the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, strategically positioned on the Bosporus Strait, linking Europe and Asia. He expanded its walls, adorned it with magnificent public buildings, hippodromes, and palaces, and filled it with Christian churches, most famously the Church of the Holy Apostles. On May 11th, in the year 330, the city was officially dedicated as Nova Roma, New Rome, though it would forever be known as Constantinople, the city of Constantine. This was more than just building a new city. It was a symbolic rebirth of the empire itself. Constantinople was conceived as a consciously Christian capital, unburdened by the pagan past of the old Rome. It was endowed with a senate and all the institutions of the ancient capital, but its soul was new. The shift was monumental. The center of gravity of the Roman world moved decisively east, where it would endure for another 1,000 years after the fall of the West, preserving Greco-Roman law, culture, and learning through what we now call the Byzantine Empire. Constantine had effectively ensured the empire's survival by splitting its identity, creating a powerful new heart that would beat long after the original had faltered. This legacy brings us to the enduring mystery of Constantine's own beliefs. Was the emperor who legalized Christianity and built a holy capital a sincerely devout convert? The evidence is complex and often contradictory. He delayed his own baptism until he was on his deathbed, a common practice at the time for those who feared sinning after the cleansing rite, which could suggest a deep personal reverence for the sacrament. He showed great favor to Christian bishops, presided over the landmark Council of Nicaea in 325 to help settle doctrinal disputes, and his mother, Helena, became a celebrated Christian saint after her pilgrimage to Jerusalem, where she was credited with finding the true cross. Yet he never fully renounced his role as Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of the traditional Roman state religion. His patronage of the church was immense, but it also brought the emperor into the very center of ecclesiastical politics, giving him unprecedented control over a now state-supported institution. This intertwining of throne and altar would define the relationship between church and state in Europe for more than a millennium. Perhaps the most accurate assessment is that Constantine was a man of his time, for whom religion and statecraft were inseparable. He may have genuinely believed the Christian God was the most powerful divine force, the summus deus or highest God, who had granted him victory. but he also recognized the immense pragmatic value of harnessing that God's followers to unify his realm. In Constantine, we see the ultimate fusion of the visionary and the pragmatist, a ruler whose personal faith may remain elusive, but whose public actions irrevocably shaped the religious and political landscape of the world to come. From the grand Christian transformation of the Roman Empire under Constantine, we now turn to a very different kind of power, one born not in palaces or council chambers, but in the raw fury of injustice. Far from the Mediterranean sun, in the misty green lands of Britannia, a queen emerged who would channel the rage of a subjugated people into a firestorm that nearly swept the Romans back into the sea. Her name was Boudica, warrior queen of the Iceni tribe, and her story is a visceral testament to the explosive force that can be unleashed when a ruler's ambition is forged in personal tragedy and collective defiance. The Iceni were a Celtic tribe inhabiting what is now Norfolk in eastern England. They had initially maintained a client kingdom status with Rome, a precarious arrangement that allowed their king, Prasutagus, to rule with a degree of autonomy in exchange for acknowledging Roman overlordship and paying tribute. This fragile peace was utterly shattered upon Prasutagus's death. In a bid to protect his family and his kingdom, he had written a will naming his two daughters as his heirs and co-heir the Roman Emperor Nero. He likely hoped this would secure his family's position, allowing them to continue ruling under Roman protection. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Roman law did not recognize hereditary succession for client kingdoms, and to the provincial officials, the will was not a diplomatic document but an invitation to plunder. They treated the entire kingdom as a conquered territory. What followed was an act of brutal humiliation that ignited the rebellion. Roman soldiers descended upon the Iceni. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, whose father-in-law served as a governor in Britain and whose accounts are our primary source, Boudica was publicly flogged, a savage punishment meant to break her spirit. Her young daughters were subjected to an even more unspeakable atrocity. They were raped by Roman slaves. The nobility of the Iceni were dispossessed of their ancestral lands, treated not as allies but as slaves. This was more than a political annexation. It was a deliberate, personal assault designed to crush a royal line and demonstrate absolute dominance. In that moment, Boudica's role transformed from grieving queen to avenging fury. Her power would be drawn not from a crown's legitimacy, but from the shared outrage of every Briton who had suffered under the Roman yoke. The revolt exploded in the year 60 of the Common Era, a moment of perfect vulnerability for the Romans. The provincial governor, Suetonius Paulinus, was far to the west, leading a major campaign on the island of Mona, modern-day Anglesey, the last stronghold of the Druids. With the main Roman military force absent, Boudica's call to arms spread like wildfire. The Iceni were joined by their neighbors, the Trinovantes, who harbored their own deep resentments over the seizure of their land for Roman veterans and the heavy financial burdens imposed upon them. Boudica, described by the Roman historian Dio Cassius as a woman of great intelligence, tall, with a fierce gaze and a harsh voice, and long, tawny hair flowing beneath a thick golden torque, became the charismatic leader of this burgeoning army. She moved among her warriors, rallying them with speeches that invoked their ancestors and the freedom they were fighting for. Their first target was the Roman colonia of Camulogenum, modern-day Colchester. This was not just a town, it was a symbol of oppression, a settlement built for retired Roman legionaries on land taken from the Trinovantes. The town was poorly defended, and despite desperate pleas for help from the Romans stationed in Londinium, a small force of only 200 men was sent, far too little to withstand the onslaught. Boudica's forces overwhelmed the settlement, tearing down the recently erected temple dedicated to the deified Emperor Claudius, a structure the Britons particularly despised. The entire population, Roman settlers and any Britons who had collaborated with them, was massacred. The archaeological record confirms the ferocity of the attack, showing a distinct layer of burnt debris known as the Boudican destruction horizon. The rebel army, now swollen with tens of thousands of warriors, surged southwest toward Londinium. This was not yet the great city it would become, but a bustling commercial trading post, a hub of Roman commerce. Suetonius Paulinus, having received word of the uprising, made a brutal strategic decision. He raced back from Wales with a portion of his cavalry, reaching Londinium ahead of Boudicca. Assessing the situation, he concluded the town was indefensible with the forces he had. He made the cold-hearted choice to abandon it, sacrificing its inhabitants to save his army. He withdrew, offering safe passage only to those who could keep up with his soldiers. Those left behind faced the full wrath of Boudicca's army. Londinium was systematically razed, its buildings burned and its people slaughtered. The same fate befell the next settlement, Verulamium, modern-day St. Albans. Tacitus claims that 70,000 Romans and pro-Roman Britons were killed in the three cities. While this number may be an exaggeration, the scale of the devastation was immense, sending a shockwave of terror all the way back to Rome itself. Suetonius Paulinus, however, was a seasoned and ruthless commander. He regrouped his forces, combining the 14th Legion with detachments from the 20th and auxiliaries, creating a professional army of around 10,000 men. He chose his battlefield with care. Historians believe he selected a narrow defile with dense woodland protecting his flanks and rear, forcing Boudicca's massive but undisciplined army to attack his tightly packed, heavily armored legions from the front. This is where one of history's great mysteries takes hold. The exact location of this final, decisive battle is unknown. Theories have placed it everywhere from the Midlands to a site near Manchester in Warwickshire, or even along the old Roman road known as Watling Street. Despite centuries of speculation and occasional archaeological finds, no conclusive evidence has surfaced to pinpoint the field where Britain's fate was decided. On the day of the battle, the contrast between the two armies was stark. The Romans stood in silent, disciplined ranks, their armor glinting. Before them stretched a vast, noisy horde of Britons, confident in their overwhelming numbers, with their families watching from wagons at the edge of the battlefield. Boudicca, with her daughters in a chariot, rode before her troops, exhorting them to victory. But the Roman tactics were devastatingly effective. As the Britons charged, the Romans unleashed a volley of heavy javelins, then advanced in a wedge formation, their short swords slicing through the lightly armored warriors. The narrow field nullified the Britons' numerical advantage, creating a deadly bottleneck. The battle turned into a rout, and the retreat was cut off by the very wagons of the Britons' own families. The Roman victory was total and merciless. The fate of Boudicca herself is as shrouded in mystery as the location of her final stand. Tacitus provides the most widely accepted account, writing that she poisoned herself to avoid capture. Dio Cassius offers a different version, stating she fell sick and died, and was given a lavish burial by her people. Either way, her revolt died with her. The rebellion was crushed with extreme prejudice, and Roman rule over Britain was re-established with even greater harshness, at least for a time. Yet the memory of the warrior queen refused to die. It is crucial to remember that our entire knowledge of Boudicca comes filtered through the pens of her enemies, the Roman historians Tacitus and Dio Cassius. They had their own reasons for telling her story, to critique the corruption of officials like those who provoked her, or to highlight the military prowess of men like Suetonius Paulinus. They likely embellished aspects, shaping her into a noble barbarian, a tragic figure whose rebellion was doomed from the start, thereby reinforcing the narrative of Rome's inevitable supremacy. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Boudicca's legacy endured through the centuries, resurfacing powerfully during the Renaissance and becoming a potent national symbol during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, when England was defining itself against foreign powers. In the Victorian era, she was celebrated as a heroic precursor to the British Empire, a symbol of fierce independence. A majestic bronze statue of her in her chariot was erected near the Houses of Parliament in London, a permanent reminder of the ancient queen who dared to defy an empire. Her story transcends the historical facts to become a timeless archetype of resistance, a reminder that the thirst for freedom, once ignited by injustice, can burn with a fire that echoes through the ages. From the defiant spirit of Boudica, our focus shifts eastward to a force of nature that swept out of the Central Asian steppes, a power so terrifying that the fractured Roman Empire saw in him a divine punishment. He was known as the Scourge of God, and his name was Attila, king of the Huns. While Boudica represented a localized, explosive reaction to Roman oppression, Attila's threat was on an entirely different scale, a mobile, continent-spanning empire of nomadic horsemen who brought both the Eastern and Western Roman empires to their knees through a masterful blend of brutality and extortion. To understand Attila's rise, we must first look past the Roman propaganda that painted the Huns as subhuman monsters. They were a confederation of nomadic pastoralists whose entire culture and identity were shaped by the horse. From childhood, Hunnic men were practically born in the saddle, learning to ride with an incredible skill that allowed them to shoot arrows accurately in any direction, even while retreating, a tactic known as the Parthian shot. Their small, sturdy steppe ponies were their most prized possessions, providing not just transportation but also food in the form of mare's milk and blood. This complete mastery of horsemanship made their army uniquely formidable. They moved with a speed that Roman legions, bound to their heavy infantry formations and supplied trains, could not hope to match. A Hunnic army could appear as if from nowhere, unleash a storm of arrows to disrupt enemy lines, and then vanish back into the plains before a proper counterattack could be organized. Their composite bows, made from layers of wood, bone, and sinew, had a range and punch that far exceeded the standard Roman equipment. For the Romans, used to facing organized armies that fought on familiar terms, the Huns were an unpredictable, terrifying whirlwind. Attila himself, however, was far more than just a savage raider. He came to power in the year 434, initially ruling jointly with his older brother, Bleda. Their first major interaction with the Eastern Roman Empire was the Treaty of Margus, which forced the Romans to double their annual tribute payments to the Huns, a massive sum of gold just to secure their borders. For a decade, Attila and Bleda alternated between raiding and extracting ever larger tributes, testing the limits of Roman patience and wealth. Then, in about 445, Bleda died. The Roman historian Priscus, who provides our most detailed account, states simply that Attila killed him, a move that consolidated all Hunnic power into the hands of one ruthless and ambitious king. With his sole rule secure, Attila turned the screw. He found a pretext to accuse the Eastern Romans of violating the treaty and launched a devastating invasion of the Balkans, crushing Roman armies and destroying cities from the Danube all the way to the walls of Constantinople itself. The Eastern Empire was forced to sue for peace, agreeing to an even more humiliating tribute. But Attila's most famous campaign was his invasion of the Western Roman Empire in 451. His stated reason was almost comically audacious. He claimed he was coming to claim his bride, Honoria, the sister of the Western Emperor Valentinian III. Years earlier, Honoria, entangled in a scandal, had secretly sent her ring to Attila, possibly as a plea for help or a desperate marriage proposal. Attila, with breathtaking gall, interpreted this as a formal betrothal and demanded half of the Western Empire as her dowry. When his demand was refused, he mobilized a massive force of Huns and their subject tribes and marched into Gaul, modern-day France. This set the stage for one of the ancient world's most colossal confrontations. The Roman general Flavius Aetius, a brilliant strategist who had once been a hostage among the Huns and knew their ways, managed the impossible. He forged a temporary alliance with the Visigoths, who had settled in Gaul and who rightly saw Attila as a threat to their own newfound kingdoms. The two armies met at the Catalonian plains in a battle of staggering ferocity. It was not a classic clash of Romans versus barbarians, but a chaotic melee of former allies and enemies on both sides. The fighting was so intense that the chroniclers claimed the streams ran with blood. Though tactically inconclusive, the battle halted Attila's advance, forcing him to withdraw from Gaul. It was the first major check on his seemingly unstoppable momentum. Undeterred, Attila turned his sights on Italy the very next year. He stormed across the Alps, sacking major cities like Aquileia so thoroughly that survivors fled to the lagoons, arguably founding what would later become Venice. The Roman army was too weak to stop him, and he marched toward Rome itself. Then something extraordinary happened. According to tradition, Pope Leo I, accompanied by a senatorial delegation, met Attila outside the city. What transpired in that meeting is one of history's great mysteries. There were no armies to threaten the Hun, and the tribute he could extract from sacking Rome would have been immense. Yet, after the meeting, Attila turned his army around and left Italy. Later Christian historians attributed this to a miraculous intervention, the awe-inspiring presence of the Pope perhaps accompanied by visions of the apostles Peter and Paul threatening Attila with divine wrath. A more pragmatic explanation suggests his army was suffering from disease and famine, and he may have been paid a large sum of gold to leave. Another fascinating theory points to the Eastern Roman army, which had finally crossed the Danube and was threatening the Huns' homeland in his absence. Whatever the true reason, the retreat from Rome cemented the legend of the Pope's power, while for Attila, it was merely a temporary setback in a career of relentless aggression. His end, however, was as sudden and mysterious as his campaigns were bold. In 453, having returned to his base on the Hungarian plain, Attila took a new, young wife named Ildiko. During the wedding celebrations, he indulged in a great feast and, according to the historian Priscus, retired to his bridal chamber heavily intoxicated. That night, he suffered a severe nosebleed. Because he was lying on his back, the blood allegedly flowed down his throat and he choked to death, unable to call for help as his new wife slept beside him. It was a bizarrely mundane end for the man who had held two empires hostage. Unsurprisingly, such an anticlimactic death immediately spawned theories of assassination. Had Ildiko been a plant poisoning the king on behalf of the Romans or a rival Hunnic faction? Was it a plot by his many sons eager to claim their inheritance? The official account of a natural death is plausible, a burst blood vessel after a lifetime of heavy drinking. But the timing on the very night of a political marriage will always fuel suspicion. His funeral was a spectacle of grief and secrecy. His riders circled his burial site, and according to legend, those who dug his grave were killed to ensure its location remained hidden forever. To this day, the tomb of Attila the Hun, potentially filled with the plunder of a continent, has never been found. The most telling aspect of Attila's legacy, however, was the breathtaking speed with which his empire vanished after his death. Unlike the empires of Rome or Persia, which had deep administrative structures, the Hunnic Empire was a personal creation, held together solely by the charisma and terror of its leader. It was a coalition of diverse and often unwilling subject tribes, Goths, Gepids, Alans, and others. With the glue of Attila's overwhelming presence gone, his sons immediately began fighting amongst themselves for the spoils. The following year, in 454, the subject tribes saw their chance and rose in rebellion. At the Battle of Nedao, a combined force of Gepids, Ostrogoths, and others defeated the Hunnic army, killing Attila's eldest son, Elac. The empire shattered into fragments, the various tribes scattering to forge their own destinies. The Huns themselves, no longer a unified force, retreated back toward the Black Sea and faded from history as a major power. Attila left behind no lasting political institutions, no cities, no legal codes. His legacy was purely one of destruction and fear, a terrifying demonstration of how a nomadic confederacy could challenge civilization itself. but also a lesson in the fragility of an empire built on plunder and personality rather than lasting foundations of law and administration. As the dust settled on the shattered empire of Attila the Hun, the Roman world, now permanently divided, entered a new chapter. In the east, the Byzantine Empire, with its magnificent capital of Constantinople, had weathered the storm of migrations and invasions. It was here, in the 6th century of the Common Era, that a ruler emerged with a vision so grand it seemed to defy the passage of time itself. His name was Justinian I, and he dreamed of a single, restored Roman Empire, a realm that would once again stretch from the Atlantic Ocean to the deserts of Mesopotamia. This was not the vision of a conqueror seeking new lands, but of an emperor haunted by the ghost of a lost legacy, determined to stitch the torn fabric of the ancient world back together. Justinian's ambition was monumental, and to achieve it, he relied on the greatest military mind of his age, a general named Belisarius. The story of their campaigns reads like an epic novel. Belisarius was a master of strategy, leading a relatively small but highly disciplined army on a series of stunning campaigns. His first great triumph was against the Vandal kingdom in North Africa. The Vandals had ruled from Carthage for a century, famously sacking Rome itself in the year 455. With a force of only 15,000 men, Belisarius landed on the African coast, defeated the Vandal army in 2 decisive battles, and captured their king, Gelimer, returning the rich provinces of North Africa to imperial control in a matter of months. Emboldened by this success, Justinian set his sights on the heart of the old Western Empire, Italy, which was then under the rule of the Ostrogoths. The campaign in Italy was longer and far more grueling. Belisarius quickly seized Sicily and then landed on the Italian peninsula, capturing the great city of Rome itself in 536. But the Goths were a resilient foe, and the war dragged on for nearly 20 years, a brutal conflict that devastated the Italian countryside and drained the Byzantine treasury. At one point, Belisarius was even recalled to Constantinople, only to be sent back when the situation deteriorated. Despite the immense cost, his military genius was undeniable. He perfected the art of defense, famously holding Rome against a massive Gothic siege, and his campaigns demonstrated that the Eastern Roman Empire still possessed the will and the skill to project its power across the Mediterranean. Yet this grand project of reconquest proved to be a Pyrrhic victory. The Italy that was reconquered was a broken, impoverished land, and the empire's resources were stretched too thin to hold it securely for long. Justinian's dream of restoration, while breathtaking in its scope, ultimately overextended his empire, leaving it vulnerable to new threats that would emerge in the centuries to come. While the military campaigns of Belisarius captured the drama of the age, Justinian's most profound and enduring legacy was not written on battlefields but in law libraries. His reign gifted the world a project of intellectual consolidation that would outlast every one of his territorial gains, the corpus juris civilis, the body of civil law. For centuries, Roman law had existed as a chaotic and contradictory mass of imperial decrees, legal opinions, and ancient statutes. It was nearly impossible for judges or citizens to know what the law actually was. Justinian appointed a commission of legal scholars under the brilliant Juris Tribonian to undertake a Herculean task: to codify, simplify, and organize 1,000 years of Roman legal tradition into a single, coherent system. The result was a masterpiece of legal engineering composed of 4 parts. The Codex compiled all valid imperial laws into one volume. The Digest was the most ambitious part, a massive condensation of the writings of Rome's great jurists, distilling centuries of legal wisdom into 50 books. The Institute served as a textbook for law students, providing a clear and systematic introduction to legal principles. Finally, the Noveli, or New Laws, contained the new legislation passed by Justinian himself. This monumental work preserved the sophisticated legal thought of the classical Roman world for posterity. but its influence did not end with the fall of Byzantium. Rediscovered in medieval Italy, the corpus juris civilis became the foundation of the civil law systems that spread across continental Europe and eventually to much of the world, including Latin America and parts of Asia and Africa. The very concept that law should be a rational, written system accessible to all owes a tremendous debt to Justinian's grand project. In a very real way, the legal frameworks that govern the lives of billions of people today can trace their lineage back to this 6th century emperor's desire for order. Yet behind this great emperor stood a figure even more remarkable, a woman whose intelligence and political will were arguably the true pillars of his power. Theodora, Justinian's wife and empress, was unlike any empress who had come before. She was not born into the purple of royalty, but into the gritty world of the Byzantine entertainment industry. Her father was a bear keeper for the Hippodrome's games, and Theodora herself began her career as an actress, a profession that in 6th century Constantinople was considered barely a step above prostitution. She traveled, had a child out of wedlock, and lived a life far from the rigid protocols of the imperial court. How she met and captivated the much more conservative Justinian is a story lost to time, but their connection was undeniable. So great was his devotion that he convinced his uncle, the aging Emperor Justin I, to change the law forbidding patricians from marrying actresses so he could make Theodora his wife. Her true mettle was revealed during the most dangerous crisis of Justinian's reign, the Nika riots of 532. What began as a clash between rival factions of chariot racing fans, the Blues and the Greens, in the Hippodrome escalated into a full-scale rebellion against Justinian's government. The city was set ablaze, the great church of Hagia Sophia was burned to the ground, and a rival emperor was proclaimed by the mob. Trapped in the palace with his advisors, a terrified Justinian was prepared to flee the city, loading ships with treasure for an escape. It was at this moment of absolute despair that Theodora rose to address the council. According to the historian Procopius, who served under Belisarius, she delivered a speech of stunning courage. She declared that royalty was a fine burial shroud and that she, for one, would not flee. "If you wish to save yourself, Emperor, that is easy. We are rich, there is the sea, here are the ships. But consider whether after you have escaped you will not gladly exchange that safety for death. I hold with the old saying that the purple is the noblest shroud." Her words shamed the men into action. Instead of fleeing, they devised a plan. Belisarius and his loyal troops marched into the Hippodrome where the rioters were gathered and proceeded to slaughter an estimated 30,000 people, crushing the rebellion utterly. Theodora's defiant stand had saved the throne. From that day forward, she ruled not merely as an empress consort, but as a full partner in power, influencing religious policy, receiving foreign ambassadors, and acting as a vital advisor. Her story is a powerful reminder that the most pivotal moments in history can hinge not on the decisions of kings, but on the unwavering resolve of a queen who refused to be defined by her past. While Justinian and Theodora were solidifying their power in Byzantium, on the other side of the world, in the dazzling court of Tang Dynasty China, a young girl was entering a world of ruthless intrigue, one where she would ultimately achieve what no woman before or since has ever accomplished. Her story is a masterclass in ambition, a breathtaking ascent through a system designed to keep women in submission, culminating in a title that shook the very foundations of Chinese civilization, Emperor. This is the story of Wu Zetian. Her journey began not in a palace, but in the home of a relatively high-ranking official. Recognized for her striking beauty and sharp intellect, she was selected around the age of 14 to enter the imperial harem of Emperor Taizong as a concubine of the 5th and quite low rank. The harem of the Tang dynasty was a gilded cage, a complex and often deadly ecosystem of hundreds of women vying for the emperor's favor. A single glance could mean promotion, a whispered rumor could mean death. It was here that the young Wu, then known as Wu Mei or Wu the Charming, learned her first crucial lessons in survival. Her intelligence caught the eye of the aging Emperor Taizong, who gave her the nickname Mei Nyang, a term with connotations of a captivating but potentially dangerous charm. She served him not just as a consort but also as a secretary, a unique position that gave her an intimate education in statecraft and the machinations of power. The true turning point came with Taizong's death. Custom dictated that childless concubines like Wu were to have their heads shaved and be consigned to a life of seclusion in a Buddhist nunnery, a living death for a woman of ambition. But Wu had already laid the groundwork for her escape. During Taizong's final illness, she had formed a connection with the crown prince Lai Zhai, who would become Emperor Gaozong. The nature of their relationship, whether it began before his father's death, is one of the many controversies that surround her, but what is certain is that Gaozong, upon becoming emperor, visited the nunnery where Wu was sequestered. Not long after, she was back in the palace, now as a concubine of his own. Her return was a stunning violation of protocol, a clear signal that her will and the new emperor's affection for her could bend the rules of tradition. Back in the heart of power, Wu's political genius ignited. Her primary obstacle was the current empress, Wang, a noblewoman of impeccable lineage who looked down upon the upstart former concubine. Wu did not confront her directly. Instead, she engaged in a campaign of psychological warfare so brutal it remains shocking centuries later. According to the official histories written by her Confucian detractors, Wu gave birth to a baby girl. The Empress Wang, who was childless, came to visit the infant. After she left, Wu allegedly smothered her own daughter, then covered her up. When Emperor Gaozong arrived, he discovered the dead child. Wu feigned grief and pointed the finger at Empress Wang, suggesting that her jealousy had driven her to the horrific act. Whether this story is factual or a later fabrication designed to vilify her, it illustrates the terrifying reputation she cultivated. Gaozong, convinced of Wang's guilt or simply swayed by Wu's influence, deposed the empress. In an even more dramatic move, Wu then accused both the former empress and a senior consort, Xiao, of using witchcraft against the emperor. Both women were imprisoned, and later, on Wu's orders, they were executed in a gruesome manner, their bodies mutilated. With her rivals eliminated, Wu Zetian was crowned empress in 655. But her ambition did not stop at being the emperor's wife. Emperor Gaozong suffered from debilitating health problems, often described as severe headaches and dizziness, which may have been the result of a stroke. Wu began to sit in on his imperial audiences, separated from the all-male courtiers by a silk screen. Gradually, she moved from listening to actively participating in governance. Gaozong came to rely heavily on her sharp political acumen, and she became the de facto co-ruler of China. When Gaozong died in 683, Wu's sons ascended the throne in succession. But she found them weak and easily influenced by other factions at court, threatening the power she had spent decades building. She deposed them, first Emperor Zhongzong and then Emperor Ruizong, ruling first as Empress Dowager and Regent. Then in 690, she took the ultimate, unimaginable step. She deposed Ruizong and declared herself emperor, founding her own short-lived Zhou dynasty. For the first and only time in Chinese history, a woman sat on the dragon throne not as a regent for a son, but as the sovereign celestial emperor herself. To legitimize her unprecedented rule, Wu turned to a powerful ally, Buddhism. She became a lavish patron of the faith, commissioning the construction of countless temples and the translation of sutras. Most famously, she sponsored the carving of the colossal Longmen grottos, where the central statue of the Buddha Vairocana is said to be modeled on her own face, serene and all-knowing. Buddhist monks, in return, produced texts that identified her as an incarnation of The Chinese letter, the future Buddha Maitreya, a divine being destined to establish a paradise on earth. This religious propaganda was a direct challenge to the Confucian orthodoxy, which held that a woman ruling was as unnatural as a hen crowing like a rooster at daybreak. By aligning herself with a universal spiritual authority that transcended gender, she crafted a powerful ideological foundation for her power. As emperor, Wu Zetian proved to be a remarkably capable administrator. She expanded the civil service examination system, weakening the power of the old aristocratic families by promoting officials based on talent and loyalty to her rather than birthright. She effectively lowered taxes for the peasantry and increased agricultural production, which earned her a degree of popular support. Her foreign policy was assertive, and the Chinese Empire under her rule saw both military successes and stability. However, her methods for maintaining control were ruthless. She cultivated a network of secret police and informers, encouraging citizens to report on each other. Those accused of disloyalty, often members of the old Tang aristocracy, faced torture, exile, or execution. This climate of fear ensured that opposition remained muted, but it also cemented her reputation in the historical record as a tyrant. This reputation is the final great mystery of Wu Zetian. Why was she so vilified by the historians who came after her? The answer lies in the hands of the scholars who compiled the official histories of the Tang dynasty after her death. These men were steeped in Confucian ideology, which prescribed a rigid social hierarchy with women in a subordinate role. A woman who not only ruled but excelled at it was an existential threat to their entire worldview. Therefore, they systematically portrayed her as a monstrous aberration, scheming, sexually deviant, and pathologically cruel. They emphasized her ruthlessness while downplaying her accomplishments. The story of her killing her own daughter comes from these biased sources and must be viewed with extreme skepticism. It is entirely possible that the infant died of natural causes, and Wu simply seized the opportunity to eliminate a rival. The true Wu Zetian is trapped between the reality of her effective, groundbreaking reign and the dark legend crafted by those who could not accept that a woman had mastered their game of power and won. In her final years, facing a palace coup, she was forced to abdicate in favor of her son, restoring the Tang dynasty. She died soon after, but her stone memorial tablet was left blank, no achievements listed, no posthumous name given. It stands as a silent, powerful testament to a ruler so controversial that history itself could not decide how to sum her up, an empty space that echoes with the sheer audacity of the woman who dared to become emperor. From the intricate and controversial court of Wu Zetian, we now journey across the vast expanse of Asia and into the heart of a Europe that had descended into what later historians would call the Dark Ages. The Western Roman Empire was a distant memory, its grandeur replaced by a patchwork of warring Germanic kingdoms. Literacy and learning had dwindled, and the light of classical knowledge flickered precariously. Yet, from this fragmentation, a new colossus would arise in the forests of Germania, a warrior king whose name would become synonymous with the rebirth of Western civilization, Charles the Great, or as we know him, Charlemagne. He inherited the crown of the Franks in the year 771, a Germanic people who had settled in the region of modern-day France and Western Germany. His father, Pepin the Short, had cemented an alliance with the papacy in Rome, a partnership that granted the Frankish kings a divine legitimacy and the Pope a powerful military protector. Charlemagne took this foundation and, over the course of more than 4 decades of nearly constant warfare, expanded it into an empire. His campaigns were relentless. To the south, he crossed the Pyrenees into Spain, battling the Umayyad Moors. To the east, he waged a long and bloody 30-year war against the pagan Saxons, a conflict that was as much a brutal forced conversion to Christianity as it was a territorial conquest. To the southeast, he conquered the Lombard kingdom in Italy, and to the north, he subdued the Bavarians. By the time his conquests were complete, his realm stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Danube and from the North Sea to central Italy. For the first time since the fall of Rome, a single ruler governed most of Western Europe. But Charlemagne's greatness lay not merely in his ability to conquer, but in his vision to build. He understood that an empire forged by the sword would not endure without the glue of administration, law, and culture. He could not be everywhere at once, so he developed a sophisticated system of governance centered on loyal counts who administered local regions or counties in his name. To keep these powerful nobles in check, he created the missi dominicii, the envoys of the Lord, who traveled in pairs, one a high-ranking church official, the other a secular noble, to inspect the counties, promulgate new laws known as capitularies, and ensure justice was being served. This system of reciprocal oversight was a masterstroke of practical statecraft. His most lasting achievement, however, was his passionate promotion of learning, an effort historians call the Carolingian Renaissance. Appalled by the declining standards of Latin and the scarcity of educated clergy, Charlemagne attracted the greatest scholars of his age to his court at Aachen, most notably the English monk Alcuin of York. Together, they embarked on an ambitious cultural project. They established a palace school for the education of the royal family and the sons of nobles, and scriptoria where monks meticulously copied classical and religious texts. Crucially, they developed a new, clear, and uniform style of handwriting known as Carolingian minuscule, which increased legibility and standardized spelling. This script became the foundation for our modern lowercase letters. By preserving ancient manuscripts that might otherwise have been lost forever, Charlemagne's scholars created a bridge that passed the knowledge of antiquity to the Middle Ages and ultimately to the modern world. This was not merely a revival of learning, it was an act of salvation. All of these achievements, the military conquests, the administrative reforms, the cultural flowering culminated in one of the most significant events of the entire Middle Ages. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Charlemagne was in Rome, attending Mass in the old St. Peter's Basilica. As he rose from prayer before the tomb of the Apostle, Pope Leo III approached and placed a golden crown upon his head. The assembled congregation, reportedly coached beforehand, proclaimed him Emperor of the Romans. In that single dramatic gesture, the idea of a Roman Empire in the West, dormant for over 3 centuries, was spectacularly revived. This moment, however, is shrouded in a fascinating historical mystery that scholars have debated for over 1,000 years. Was the coronation a surprise orchestrated by the Pope, or a carefully planned move by Charlemagne himself? The official Frankish chronicles suggest it was an unexpected act by Leo III. This version paints Charlemagne as slightly annoyed, claiming he later stated that he would not have entered the church that day if he had known the Pope's intention. This account serves a clear purpose. It portrays Charlemagne as a humble servant of God, receiving the honor reluctantly, his power legitimized by divine will through the Pope's hands, not seized by his own ambition. But consider the context. Pope Leo was in a precarious position. The previous year, he had been attacked in the streets of Rome by rivals who accused him of various crimes, and he had fled to Charlemagne for protection. It was Charlemagne's power that restored him to the papal throne. Was Leo's coronation of Charlemagne, therefore, a grand and very public act of gratitude, a way to permanently bind the Frankish king to the defense of the papacy by making him the official emperor? Or was it perhaps an even more cunning move by Leo to assert the Church's superiority? By being the one to crown the emperor, the Pope was establishing a powerful precedent. That imperial power was granted by the Church, an idea that would lead to centuries of conflict between popes and emperors. The alternative theory is that the entire event was a meticulously staged piece of political theater, planned down to the last detail by Charlemagne and his advisors. He was the most powerful man in the West, his title of king seeming almost inadequate for the vast territory he controlled. The imperial title of Emperor of the Romans granted him a legitimacy that transcended that of a mere Germanic warlord, placing him on an equal footing with the Roman emperor in Constantinople. It unified his diverse empire under a single, glorious Roman ideal. The supposed surprise and reluctance could have been a carefully crafted performance to avoid the appearance of arrogant ambition, allowing him to accept the crown with an air of pious humility. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a complex negotiation of mutual interest between a king who needed the church's spiritual authority and a pope who needed a king's temporal sword. Whatever the precise planning, the coronation of Charlemagne created a new political entity, the Holy Roman Empire, an institution that would shape the destiny of Central Europe for a millennium and set the stage for an enduring struggle between spiritual and secular power. While Charlemagne was being crowned emperor in the splendor of St. Peter's, forging a new empire from the ashes of Rome, a very different kind of power was being wielded far to the north, not in grand cathedrals but aboard sleek, dragon-headed longships. The Viking Age was in full swing, and its chieftains derived their authority not from papal coronations but from their prowess as explorers, traders, and warriors. Among these formidable figures, one stands out not for the kingdoms he ruled, but for the impossible frontier he dared to colonize: Erik Thorvaldsson, known to history as Erik the Red. His story is a saga of violent exile, breathtaking discovery, and a mystery that lingers in the icy silence of Greenland's fjords. Erik's journey to becoming a founder of settlements began with his exile from not one, but two Norse communities. His family was originally forced to leave Norway around the year 960, likely due to some killings involving his father, Thorvald. They settled in the rugged, recently colonized land of Iceland. But the apple, as the saying goes, did not fall far from the tree. In Iceland, Erik himself became embroiled in a series of violent disputes. The most serious incident recounted in the Icelandic sagas involved a conflict with a neighbor that escalated into a massacre, resulting in several deaths. For these killings, the local assembly declared Erik an outlaw, banishing him from Iceland for 3 years. This sentence of outlawry was more than a simple expulsion. It was a death sentence in slow motion if he could not find a place to survive. With the known world closed to him, Erik made a fateful decision. He would use his years of exile not to hide, but to explore a shadowy land that had been sighted decades earlier by another Norse sailor, Gunnbjörn Ulfsson, who had been blown off course and seen icy mountains in the distance. Erik equipped a ship and set sail westward into the unknown, a testament to the incredible seafaring courage of the Vikings. He spent his 3 years of exile meticulously exploring the seemingly endless coastline of this new world. He discovered 2 major regions: a desolate, ice-cap-covered eastern coast and further west, more hospitable fjords with green valleys in the brief summer. It was a brutal land, but a survivable one. When his exile ended, he returned to Iceland with a masterstroke of persuasive branding. He called this harsh, frozen country Greenland, knowing full well that an attractive name would entice settlers. As he reportedly said, people would be more tempted to go there if it had an appealing name. His sales pitch worked. Around the year 985, he led a fleet of 25 ships carrying several hundred hopeful colonists back to the land he had named. The Norse settlement they established, known as the Eastern Settlement, was a marvel of adaptation. They built farmsteads modeled on their Icelandic homes, with longhouses made of stone and turf to withstand the fierce winds. They raised livestock, cattle, sheep, and goats, and hunted for seals, walruses, and even the occasional polar bear. They were not just subsistence farmers, their economy had a global reach. The most valuable commodity they traded was walrus ivory. In a medieval Europe where elephant ivory was scarce and highly prized for religious art and luxury goods, Norse Greenland became a key supplier. Tusks and hides were exported back to Norway and beyond, connecting this remote outpost to the trade networks of continental Europe. At its peak, the Greenland settlement grew to a population of perhaps 3,000 to 5,000 people, with a second, smaller western settlement established further north. They had their own church, and eventually a bishop was sent from Europe, a sign that this community was considered a permanent, if remote, part of Christendom. This brings us to the profound and haunting mystery of the Norse Greenlanders. For nearly 500 years they endured. Then, in the 15th century, they vanished. The last written record we have is a marriage recorded in the church at Hatshepsut in the eastern settlement in the year 1408. After that, silence. When European ships finally began to visit Greenland again in the 16th and 17th centuries, they found only ruins. What happened to Eric the Red's descendants? For a long time, the prevailing theory was that a sudden, dramatic cooling period known as the Little Ice Age simply made the land too cold to farm, leading to starvation and the colony's collapse. While climate change certainly played a role, the story is far more complex and serves as a chilling lesson in societal inflexibility. The Norse settlers were deeply conservative. They clung fiercely to their European identity, which was centered on being pastoral farmers. They relied on their cattle, which required vast amounts of hay to survive the long winters, a resource that would have become scarcer as temperatures dropped. Meanwhile, another people had also made Greenland their home, the Thule culture ancestors of the modern Inuit. The Inuit were masters of the Arctic environment. Their technology was perfectly suited for survival. They built kayaks and umiaks for hunting at sea, used sophisticated toggle-headed harpoons to hunt large sea mammals like whales, and crafted warm clothing from sealskin. Archaeological evidence shows there was contact between the Norse and the Inuit, and some of it was likely violent. The Icelandic annals for the year 1379 state that the western settlement was attacked by Skraelings, the Norse term for the indigenous people. But there is also evidence of trade, with Norse artifacts found in Inuit sites. The true tragedy may not have been a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, stubborn refusal to adapt. The Norse could have learned survival techniques from the Inuit, how to hunt seals and whales from the ice, how to better insulate their homes. But their cultural pride and their identity as cattle farmers appear to have prevented them from fully embracing the lifeways of the people they considered inferior pagans. They starved not necessarily because there was no food, but because they refused to change their definition of what food was. They continued to try to raise European livestock in an increasingly unforgiving landscape, while the Inuit thrived on the rich marine resources all around them. The mystery of their disappearance is not one of a single event, but of a gradual fading, a community that chose cultural extinction over transformation, leaving behind only their stone foundations as silent witnesses to a failed experiment in extreme colonization. While the Greenland colony faded into mystery, a different kind of maritime empire was being forged across the North Sea, one that briefly united the Viking world with the Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of England. Its architect was a figure of profound contradiction, a Viking conqueror who became a devout Christian king, a ruthless warrior who sought the approval of the church, and a ruler of an empire that seemed to herald a new age, only to vanish almost the moment he was gone. This was Canute the Great, and his story forces us to reconsider what it truly meant to hold power in the 11th century. Canute, or Signut, was born around the year 990, the son of Sweyn Forkbeard, the king of Denmark who had launched a massive invasion of England. When Sweyn died suddenly in 1014, just weeks after being declared King of England, the English nobles immediately recalled their previous king, Ethelred the Unready, from exile in Normandy. Canute, who had been left in command of the Danish fleet in England, was suddenly stranded, a young prince with a claim to a crown that had been snatched away. In a brutal display of Viking pragmatism, he reportedly had the hostages given to his father by English nobles mutilated and left on the beach before sailing back to Denmark to regroup. This was not the act of a future pious king, but of a chieftain sending a clear message of his ruthless intent to return. And return he did. After securing the Danish throne following his brother's death, Canute led a massive invasion force back to England in 1016. What followed was a brutal war of attrition against Ethelred, and after his death, his son Edmund Ironside. The conflict was decided at the Battle of Asandun, where Canute's forces were victorious, but Edmund fought so fiercely that the two kings agreed to partition the country. When Edmund died just weeks later under suspicious circumstances, Canute became the sole ruler of England. To solidify his hold and prevent any challenges from Ethelred's exiled sons, he married their mother, Emma of Normandy, a brilliant political move that tied him to the English royal lineage and neutralized a powerful rival faction. Now Canute the Viking conqueror faced his greatest challenge: how to rule the sophisticated and deeply Christian kingdom of England. He understood that power gained by the sword could not be held by the sword alone. He needed legitimacy, and in 11th century England that legitimacy flowed from God and the Church. So he embarked on a breathtaking transformation of his own image. He presented himself not as a foreign pillager, but as a Christian monarch in the mold of his Anglo-Saxon predecessors. He issued a famous law code that began with a proclamation of his Christian faith. He made lavish gifts of gold and silver to the Church, and he went on a pilgrimage to Rome to attend the coronation of the Holy Roman Emperor, rubbing shoulders with the most powerful Christian rulers in Europe. He even sent a letter back to England describing the splendor of the event and promising to rule justly and protect the Church. This was a masterclass in public relations, a conscious effort to reassure his new subjects that he was their rightful, godly king. It is in this context that we encounter the most famous story about Canute, a tale that has been told for 1,000 years, though historians widely believe it to be a later invention by a monkish chronicler seeking to teach a lesson about humility. The story goes that King Canute, growing weary of the constant flattery of his courtiers, who insisted his power was so great that even the natural world obeyed him, decided to teach them a lesson. He had his throne carried down to the seashore as the tide was coming in. He sat upon it and commanded the waves to halt. "I command you to come no further." He proclaimed. Of course, the tide paid no heed, continuing to rise and lapping around his feet and legs. Soaked and humbled, Canute then declared that only God possessed true command over the elements, and that the power of earthly kings was fleeting and insignificant. Whether it actually happened is almost irrelevant. The power of the story lies in its perfect encapsulation of Canute's political genius. For his Christian English subjects, it portrayed him as a wise and humble king who recognized the supremacy of God, a narrative that directly countered his image as a pagan Viking. It was a public demonstration designed to show that he understood the proper limits of royal authority, a concept that would have deeply resonated with a population governed by divine law. Yet, at the very same time, this supposedly humble king was also the absolute master of a North Sea empire that included England, Denmark, and, after a long campaign, Norway. He was a king of two worlds, skillfully balancing his identity. In England, he was the pious Christian monarch. In Scandinavia, he remained a traditional Viking ruler, a generous ring giver to his loyal warriors, a patron of skalds who composed poems praising his battles. He did not abandon his Norse roots. He managed a dual identity, a feat of political dexterity that few rulers have ever accomplished. This brings us to the great mystery of his reign. Why did his North Sea Empire, this formidable union of three kingdoms, dissolve almost immediately after his death in 1035? It was not conquered by an external enemy. It simply came apart from within. The primary reason lies in the fundamental nature of his power. Canute's empire was not a unified state with a centralized administration like the Roman Empire. It was a personal union held together by his own formidable reputation, his military strength, and the vast wealth he extracted from England, which he used to buy the loyalty of Scandinavian chieftains. It was an empire built on the personal authority of one exceptional man. When that man died, the inherent weaknesses were exposed. The traditions of succession in the Norse world were different from the growing primogeniture or rule by the firstborn son in England. Inheritance was often divided among a man's sons. Canute had several sons from different relationships, leading to immediate and violent competition. His chosen heir for England, Hatshepsut, was busy securing his hold on Denmark when Canute died. This left a power vacuum in England that was quickly filled by Harald Hardrada, another of Canute's sons, leading to a bitter civil war. Meanwhile, in Norway, the people who had chafed under the heavy taxation of Canute's regents rose up and restored their own native dynasty under the legendary King Magnus the Good. The empire fractured along its old ethnic and political fault lines because there was no permanent institutional framework. No common law, no shared bureaucracy, no single national identity to bind it together once the powerful personality at its center was gone. Canute's legacy, therefore, is a paradox. He demonstrated the immense potential of a unified Northern Europe, but he also proved that an empire built on personal loyalty and tribute cannot outlive the charismatic ruler who created it. His reign was a brilliant, fleeting moment of unity, a high tide that, despite the legend, even he could not command to stay. From the cold shores of Canute's North Sea, we now travel to the sun-drenched vineyards of southwestern France, to a court that pulsed with a very different kind of energy. Here, in the 12th century, a young woman inherited a domain richer and more cultured than the Kingdom of France itself. She was Elena, Duchess of Aquitaine, and her life would unfold as a grand medieval epic, a breathtaking saga of power, passion, rebellion, and survival that defied every constraint placed upon her gender. As queen consort to two powerful kings and mother to two more, Elena navigated the treacherous political landscape of Europe not as a passive ornament, but as a formidable force in her own right, leaving behind a legacy shrouded in as much mystery as admiration. Elena's story begins with an unprecedented inheritance. At just 15 years old, following the death of her father and younger brother, she became the sole ruler of the Duchy of Aquitaine, a vast and wealthy territory that encompassed much of southwestern France. Aquitaine was not just large, it was the heart of a vibrant culture known as the courtoisie, where poetry, music, and the ideals of chivalry flourished. The sophisticated court at Poitiers was a world away from the more austere and warlike atmosphere of Paris. This background is crucial to understanding Elena. She was not a pawn to be married off. She was a sovereign duchess who brought her lands and their immense power into her marriages. Her first marriage to the soon-to-be King Louis VII of France was a strategic union that should have strengthened the French crown enormously. Louis, however, was a deeply pious and rather meek man, more suited to the life of a monk than that of a king. The contrast between the two could not have been starker. Elena was vibrant, intelligent, and strong-willed. Louis was reserved and indecisive. Their union was fraught with tension from the start, a clash of cultures and personalities that would have profound historical consequences. This clash came to a head during the Second Crusade, when the revered preacher Bernard of Clairvaux called for a new holy war to secure the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Louis VII took the cross, viewing it as a penitential act. Elena, in a move that shocked contemporaries, announced she would accompany him, not as a passive companion, but as the feudal lord of her own Aquitanian vassals, leading her own knights and soldiers. Her presence on the campaign was anything but conventional. As the crusading army marched through Anatolia, stories swirled about Elena's lavish lifestyle and her influence over strategic decisions. The most persistent and scandalous rumor involved her supposed affair with her uncle, Raymond of Poitiers, the Prince of Antioch. When the crusade reached Antioch, Raymond proposed a sensible military plan to consolidate Christian power in the region, a plan Elena vigorously supported. Louis, however, suspicious of the close relationship between his wife and her uncle, rejected it outright, insisting on marching toward Jerusalem. The resulting military disaster was a humiliation for Louis, and the marriage, already fragile, shattered completely. The rift was so deep that upon their return to Europe, Elena sought an annulment on the grounds of consanguinity, meaning they were too closely related. In 1152, a council of bishops granted it, and the marriage was dissolved. The Queen of France was once again the Duchess of Aquitaine, a free and immensely powerful woman. Her freedom was spectacularly short-lived, but her next move would reshape European history. Just months after the annulment, Elena married Henry Plantagenet, the dynamic and ambitious Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, a man 11 years her junior. 2 years later, Henry became King Henry II of England, and Elena became his queen. Together, they ruled an empire that stretched from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees, an assemblage of lands often called the Angevin Empire. For a time, this power couple seemed unstoppable. Henry was a brilliant administrative and legal reformer, a whirlwind of energy, while Elena governed their continental possessions with skill. They had 8 children together, including 5 sons, a seemingly secure foundation for a lasting dynasty. But the very passions that brought them together would eventually tear them apart. Henry was not only energetic, he was notoriously unfaithful and possessed a ferocious temper. As their sons grew older, Henry's refusal to grant them any real power, combined with his open affairs, created a poisonous atmosphere at court. This tension exploded into one of the most dramatic rebellions in medieval history. In 1173, Elena's sons, Henry the Young King, Richard, and Geoffrey, rose up against their father, backed by King Louis VII of France, Elena's first husband, and other disgruntled nobles. The burning question that has tantalized historians for centuries is this: what was Elena's role? Was she a victim of Henry's tyranny, pushed to defend her son's birthright? Or was she the mastermind behind the entire revolt, orchestrating a grand plan to curb her husband's power and secure her own influence through her favored son, Richard? The evidence points strongly to the latter. While still in Poitiers, she actively rallied her Aquitanian vassals to the rebel cause. She did not merely support her sons, she was the political engine of the rebellion, using her extensive networks and authority to build a coalition against Henry. The revolt, however, ultimately failed. Henry's military prowess prevailed, and the rebel sons were forced to submit, but Elena could not simply be forgiven. While traveling in male disguise, perhaps attempting to flee to the court of her ex-husband in Paris, she was captured by Henry's forces. For her betrayal, the king did not have her executed. Instead, he imposed a far more cunning punishment. He imprisoned her. Elena's imprisonment would last for 16 years, a period that might have broken a lesser spirit. She was moved between various castles in England, most often held at Old Sarum or Winchester, kept under guard but not in harsh conditions. She was a high-status prisoner, but a prisoner nonetheless, removed from the political stage at the height of her power. This long captivity presents a profound mystery. Was it a simple act of containment, ensuring a powerful rival could no longer plot against him? Or was there a more complex dynamic at play? Some historians suggest Henry, for all his anger, could not bring himself to harm her permanently, perhaps out of lingering affection or respect for her station. Others argue that keeping her alive but locked away was the safest option. Killing her would have alienated her loyal subjects in Aquitaine and created a martyr. Whatever his reasons, Henry effectively neutralized the most dangerous threat to his rule for over a decade and a half. Her release came only with Henry II's death in 1189. Her favorite son, Richard, immediately ordered her freed. At nearly 70 years of age, Elena did not retire. She erupted back onto the political scene with undiminished vigor. She became Richard's most trusted regent while he embarked on the Third Crusade. She tirelessly administered his kingdom, raised his monumental ransom when he was captured on his return journey, and personally delivered it to Germany. After Richard's death, she worked just as fiercely to secure the English throne for her youngest son, John, journeying across the Pyrenees at nearly 80 years old to fetch a bride for him from Castile to strengthen his political alliances. In her final years, she retired to the Abbey of Fontevraud, where she took the veil. Her effigy there shows her not in the quiet piety of a nun, but reading a book, an eternal symbol of her cultivated and formidable intellect. Elena of Aquitaine's true power may be impossible to measure precisely, but its echo is undeniable. She was a woman who shaped the destiny of nations through 2 marriages, a rebellion, and the reigns of her sons, a figure who challenges us to see the women of the Middle Ages not as shadows, but as central players in the grand and dangerous game of power. While the courts of Europe were embroiled in the dynastic dramas of kings and queens, a storm was gathering on the vast, windswept plains of Central Asia that would unleash a force so transformative it would reshape the entire known world. This story begins not in a palace, but in the harsh wilderness of the Mongolian steppe, where a boy named Temujin was born clutching a blood clot in his hand, an omen that foretold a future drenched in both destiny and bloodshed. His early life was a brutal struggle for survival. When he was just 9 years old, his father, a minor chieftain, was poisoned by a rival tribe. His own clan abandoned Temujin, his mother, and his siblings, leaving them to starve. They survived by eating roots and small game, and in one harrowing incident, Temujin killed his own half-brother in a fight over a fish, a stark demonstration of the merciless code of the steppes that would define his rise. He was even captured and enslaved, wearing a heavy wooden collar before making a daring escape. These years of hardship forged in him an iron will, a profound understanding of tribal politics, and a burning desire to transcend the endless cycle of feud and vengeance that defined the nomadic tribes. Temujin's genius lay not in his birthright, but in his ability to reinvent the very structure of power on the steppes. The Mongol tribes were traditionally organized by kinship, a system that led to perpetual infighting. Temujin envisioned a new kind of loyalty, one based on personal allegiance and merit rather than bloodlines. He began to attract followers, promising them a share of the plunder and advancement based on ability alone. He welcomed warriors from rival tribes, even those who had once been his enemies, as long as they swore absolute loyalty to him. This principle of promotion by merit was revolutionary. One of his most talented generals, Subutai, was the son of a blacksmith, yet he would become one of the greatest military strategists in history, leading campaigns that stretched from China to Eastern Europe. Temujin's growing coalition proved unstoppable. Through a combination of shrewd diplomacy, strategic marriages, and overwhelming force, he methodically united the quarrelsome Mongol tribes. In 1206, at a great gathering known as a Kurultai, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title meaning universal ruler. For the first time, the people of the felt-walled tents were one nation. With a unified Mongolia at his back, Genghis Khan turned his gaze outward, and the world felt the shock. The Mongol military machine was unlike anything seen before. Its core was the lightning-fast cavalry archer, a warrior who could fire accurately from horseback at a full gallop, using The Chinese letter, a composite bow made from layers of sinew, horn, and wood that had a range and power far exceeding contemporary European weapons. Their tactics were sophisticated and relentlessly effective. They would feign retreat, drawing enemy armies into disordered pursuit, only to suddenly wheel around and annihilate them. They used complex signaling systems with flags and drums to coordinate massive armies across vast distances. Perhaps most terrifyingly, they perfected the art of psychological warfare. The mere approach of the Mongol Tumans, units of 10,000 men, could cause panic. Cities were given a choice: surrender and pay tribute, or resist and face utter destruction. If a city chose to fight and was captured, the consequences were horrifying. The population was often massacred as a calculated warning to the next city on their path, a tactic designed to shatter morale and minimize future resistance. This reputation for terror preceded his armies, but to see Genghis Khan only as a destroyer is to miss the profound complexity of his legacy. Once conquest was complete, he proved to be a surprisingly pragmatic and effective administrator. He implemented a written legal code for his empire, the Yasa, which forbade the kidnapping of women, theft of livestock, and fighting among his subjects, bringing a harsh but clear order to the lands he controlled. He was deeply tolerant of different religions, often consulting with Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, and Taoist scholars, believing that it was important to honor the spirits of every people. His greatest and most lasting achievement, however, was the creation of the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. By unifying the entire Silk Road under one stable, orderly authority, he eliminated the countless petty kingdoms and bandit lords that had made travel perilous for centuries. For the first time, it was safe to travel from the shores of the Mediterranean to the court of China. Trade flourished as never before, with goods, ideas, and technologies flowing freely across Eurasia. This exchange had world-altering consequences. Some historians argue that everything from the transmission of gunpowder to Europe to the spread of the Black Death can be traced back to the interconnected world that Genghis Khan inadvertently created. The end of this colossal life is as shrouded in mystery as its beginning. In 1227, while campaigning against the Western Xia dynasty in China, Genghis Khan died. The exact cause remains unknown, with theories ranging from a fall from his horse to an illness or an battle injury, but his final command was his most secretive. According to legend, his body was carried by his most loyal followers back to his homeland in Mongolia. To ensure his final resting place would never be disturbed, the funeral procession killed every person they encountered on the journey. Once he was buried, the soldiers who attended the ceremony were themselves executed by a second unit of warriors, who were then in turn killed. The ground was trampled by 1,000 horses to erase any trace of the grave, and a river was even supposedly diverted to flow over the site. The result is that the tomb of one of history's most consequential figures, a man who ruled an empire of unprecedented size, has vanished completely. For decades, archaeologists and treasure hunters have searched the sacred Burkhan Khaldun mountain and other suspected sites, using satellite imagery and advanced technology, but the grave has never been found. It remains one of history's ultimate secrets, a fittingly enigmatic end for a ruler who understood that true power often lies not in grand monuments, but in the unbreakable loyalty of his followers and the enduring, terrifying echo of his name. The legacy of Genghis Khan was a sprawling empire divided among his sons, but it was his grandson who would achieve a goal that had eluded even the great conqueror himself: the complete subjugation of China. This ruler was Kublai Khan, a man who embodied a fascinating duality, bridging the world of the nomadic steppe and the ancient, sophisticated civilization of the Chinese. He inherited the title of Great Khan, the nominal overlord of the entire Mongol domain, but his true life's work became the conquest and governance of the Song dynasty in southern China, the last remaining independent Chinese state. This was no simple task. The Song were a formidable foe, possessing immense wealth, a huge population, and advanced military technology like gunpowder and formidable navies on their extensive river networks. Kublai understood that to defeat them, he could not rely on cavalry alone. He had to build a navy, a stunning adaptation for a people from the landlocked heart of Asia. After a long and grueling campaign, the last Song resistance was crushed in 1279, and Kublai became the first non-Chinese ruler to conquer all of China, founding the Yuan dynasty. To rule this vast new empire, Kublai needed a capital worthy of his ambition, a symbolic link between his Mongolian heritage and his Chinese subjects. He chose a site in the north, near the ruins of the former Jin dynasty capital, and began construction of a magnificent new city called Dadu, which means Great Capital. though it was known to the Mongols as Khanbalik, the city of the Khan. This city would eventually evolve into modern Beijing, making Kublai the father of the city we know today. At its heart was an immense imperial palace surrounded by walls and moats, a forbidden city filled with treasures and administrative buildings. Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant who claimed to have served in Kublai's court, described it with awe, writing of halls so vast they could host dinners for thousands, roofs glinting with red and green lacquer, and a menagerie of exotic animals. This was not a temporary camp of felt tents. It was a permanent statement of power designed to project the majesty and permanence of Yuan rule. The accounts of Marco Polo present one of the most enduring historical puzzles of Kublai's reign. His book, The Travels of Marco Polo, introduced a mesmerized Europe to the splendors of the East, describing Kublai Khan as a wise and magnificent emperor, his capital as the most magnificent on earth, and Chinese innovations like paper money and coal as marvels. Polo claimed to have spent 17 years in Kublai's service, traveling as an envoy to distant parts of the empire. Yet, from his own time to the present day, skeptics have questioned the veracity of his tales. He never mentioned the Great Wall, a massive structure that would have been impossible to miss. He failed to record customs like foot binding or the drinking of tea, which would have been highly conspicuous to a foreigner. Most damningly, his name does not appear in any surviving Chinese or Mongol annals, which meticulously recorded the comings and goings of foreign dignitaries. So, was Marco Polo ever really in China? The most plausible explanation is a blend of truth and embroidery. He likely did travel to the Mongol world, perhaps reaching its outer regions, and gathered stories from other Persian and Turkish merchants who had been to Dadu. He then wove these second-hand accounts with his own observations and a healthy dose of exaggeration to create a sensational story for a European audience utterly unfamiliar with the East. His descriptions of Kublai Khan, while likely inflated, do capture the essence of the ruler, a pragmatic leader who, unlike his grandfather, embraced aspects of Chinese culture to legitimize his rule. Kublai adopted Chinese court rituals, promoted Buddhism while tolerating other faiths, and maintained the traditional Chinese bureaucratic structure, though he placed Mongols and other trusted foreigners like Persians in the highest positions of power, creating a multi-ethnic administration that governed the world's largest land empire. Despite his success in China, Kublai's ambition reached across the sea to the islands of Japan. Twice in 1274 and 1281, he launched massive invasion fleets, the largest the world had ever seen. The first invasion was hampered by difficult terrain and fierce samurai resistance, forcing a withdrawal. The second invasion was far more colossal, involving thousands of ships and tens of thousands of troops from China and Korea. The Japanese defenders, heavily outnumbered, were pushed back to their fortifications on Kyushu, facing what seemed like certain defeat. Then, history intervened with a force beyond any human army. A massive typhoon, a divine wind or kamikaze in Japanese, struck the Mongol fleet as it lay at anchor. The ships, many of them hastily built river craft unsuitable for open ocean storms, were smashed against the coastline and sunk. The loss of life was catastrophic, and the invasion was utterly destroyed. For Japan, these typhoons were nothing short of a miracle, a divine intervention that confirmed their belief in their status as a sacred land protected by the gods. The legend of the kamikaze became a central pillar of Japanese national identity for centuries. For Kublai Khan, the failed invasions were a staggering blow to his prestige and a massive drain on the Yuan treasury. They revealed the limits of Mongol power, demonstrating that even the most formidable land army could be humbled by nature and determined island defenders. These defeats, combined with the immense cost of his other projects and a series of ill-advised military campaigns in Southeast Asia, began a slow decline that would eventually lead to the fall of the Yuan dynasty within a century of his death. Kublai Khan stands as a monumental figure of synthesis, a conqueror who tried to build a lasting empire by fusing the steppe and the Saône, whose court became a legend in the West, and whose failures at sea inadvertently forged a legend in the East that would endure for over 700 years. While Kublai Khan was establishing his Yuan dynasty in the East, a different kind of unification was taking shape on the Iberian Peninsula, one driven not by a conqueror from the steppes, but by a determined queen whose faith and ambition would forge a nation and alter the course of global history. Her name was Isabella I of Castile, and her reign stands as a monumental study in the paradox of power, a legacy of profound achievement intertwined with deep shadows. When she ascended the throne of Castile in 1474, the peninsula was a fractured mosaic of Christian kingdoms and the last remaining Muslim emirate of Granada. Isabella's marriage to Ferdinand, the heir to the neighboring crown of Aragon, was far more than a romantic union. It was a masterstroke of statecraft, a dynastic merger that effectively created the spine of what we now know as Spain. Together, they were known as the Catholic monarchs, a title that reveals the very heart of their mission. Their primary and most celebrated goal was the completion of the Reconquista, the centuries-long campaign by Christian kingdoms to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Islamic rule. For over 700 years, a fragile and often violent coexistence had defined the region, but by Isabella's time, the magnificent Alhambra Palace in Granada was the final bastion of Muslim power. The war to take it was not a swift blitz but a grueling 10-year campaign of sieges and skirmishes, a massive financial and military drain on the nascent Spanish state. Isabella did not merely fund this war from a distant palace. She was an active participant, often traveling with the army, overseeing the logistics of siege engines and supply lines, and even being pregnant on campaign. Her presence was a powerful symbol, galvanizing the troops and demonstrating her unwavering commitment to what she and Ferdinand framed as a holy crusade. On January 2, 1492, their perseverance was finally rewarded. The last Muslim ruler, Muhammad XII, known as Boabdil, surrendered the keys to the city. The royal standard of Castile and Aragon was raised over the Alhambra, and the Reconquista was complete. In that moment, Isabella and Ferdinand stood as the unifiers of Spain, the monarchs who had, in their eyes, purified their homeland. Yet, even as the celebrations for Granada's fall were underway, Isabella was already turning her attention to a project that seemed, to many of her advisors, like a fantastical gamble. A Genoese navigator named Christopher Columbus had been persistently courting the Spanish court with a radical proposal: to reach the riches of the East by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean. The idea had been rejected by Portugal's experts, who correctly calculated that the distance was far greater than Columbus claimed. Isabella's council of scholars was equally skeptical, advising her against wasting royal funds on such a dubious venture. But something about Columbus's vision captured the Queen's imagination. After years of delay, and with the treasury strained by the recent war, she finally agreed to sponsor his expedition. Legend has it that she even offered to pawn her own personal jewels to fund the voyage, though historical records suggest the money was actually raised from the treasury of the recently conquered Granada. Whether fueled by a desire to spread Catholicism, a thirst for gold to fund future crusades against the Ottoman Turks, or simply a ruler's instinct for a transformative opportunity, Isabella's decision was one of the most consequential in human history. When Columbus returned in 1493 with news of a new world, he did not find the spices of Asia, but he unlocked a chain of events that would make Spain the first global superpower, flooding its coffers with American silver and forever linking the destinies of Europe and the Americas. It was a testament to Isabella's power that she could authorize a voyage that would reshape the world, but it also unleashed forces of colonization and conquest whose devastating consequences would unfold for centuries. This duality, this blend of visionary ambition and rigid piety, defines the most troubling aspect of Isabella's legacy. Just months after the fall of Granada, she and Ferdinand signed the Alhambra Decree, an edict ordering the expulsion of all Jews from their kingdoms. Those who refused to convert to Catholicism were given 4 months to leave, forced to abandon their homes, their businesses, and their centuries-old communities. This was not an isolated act of intolerance. It was the culmination of a process that had begun years earlier with the establishment of the Spanish Inquisition in 1478. Unlike earlier Inquisitions, this one was directly controlled by the Spanish crown, answerable to the monarchs rather than the Pope. Its purpose was to ensure the orthodoxy of those who had converted from Judaism and Islam, the so-called conversos and moriscos, but its methods were brutal, employing torture and public executions in spectacles known as autos da fe to root out suspected heresy. The question that has haunted historians ever since is one of motivation. Was Isabella a fervent fanatic, a woman so consumed by her Catholic faith that she genuinely believed she was saving souls, even at the cost of tearing her kingdom apart? Or was she a ruthlessly pragmatic ruler, using religion as a tool to consolidate her power and create a unified national identity? The truth likely lies in a complex and inseparable fusion of the two. The unification of Spain was not just a political project for Isabella, it was a divine one. A kingdom united under one God, one law, and one monarch was, in her worldview, a stronger and more righteous kingdom. The Inquisition served as a terrifyingly effective mechanism of control, breaking the power of old noble families and ensuring absolute loyalty to the crown. The expulsion of the Jews and, later, the Muslims removed populations whose faith was seen as a threat to this religious homogeneity. In Isabella's mind, faith and statecraft were not in conflict. They were two sides of the same coin, both necessary to build the strong Catholic Spain she envisioned. Her legacy, therefore, is impossible to judge simply. She is both the queen who launched Europe into a new age of exploration and the monarch who inaugurated a period of religious persecution whose echoes of intolerance would resonate for generations, a powerful reminder that the drive to build a nation can sometimes come at a profound human cost. As we pivot from the fervent Catholic courts of Spain, our gaze turns eastward to a rival power whose shadow loomed equally large over the 16th century, an empire that stretched across 3 continents and whose ruler would earn a title that echoed through the halls of Europe, the Magnificent. In Constantinople, the city that Constantine had founded and that now served as the heart of the Ottoman Empire, Sultan Suleiman I ascended to the throne in 1520, heralding an era that would represent the absolute zenith of Ottoman power, culture, and ambition. His reign was a symphony of contrasts: fierce military expansion paired with meticulous legal codification, brutal dynastic politics existing alongside a breathtaking flourishing of art and architecture. He was a ruler who commanded both the battlefield and the law book with equal authority, a sultan who would forever shape the identity of his empire and its complex relationship with the West. Suleiman's military campaigns were relentless and expansive, pushing the boundaries of the Ottoman Empire further than ever before. He became the scourge of Christian Europe, particularly the Habsburg dynasty, which ruled the Holy Roman Empire and Spain, creating a grand rivalry that would define international politics for decades. His formidable army centered on the elite Janissary Corps, professional soldiers conscripted as boys and raised to be utterly loyal to the Sultan, seemed unstoppable. He captured the strategic island of Rhodes from the Knights Hospitaller after a grueling siege, securing Ottoman dominance in the eastern Mediterranean. His navies, under the command of brilliant admirals like Barbarossa, terrorized the coasts of Italy and Spain, turning the Mediterranean into virtually an Ottoman lake. But his most ambitious target lay to the north, the city of Vienna, the gateway to Central Europe. In 1529, Suleiman led a massive army of over 100,000 men and colossal cannons on a campaign to capture this prized city. The Siege of Vienna was a climatic moment, a direct assault on the heart of Habsburg power. The Viennese defenders, though vastly outnumbered, put up a desperate resistance, bolstered by fortifications and unseasonably heavy rains that turned the Ottoman camps into a sea of mud, bogging down their artillery. After 3 weeks of intense fighting and mounting losses, Suleiman was forced to order a retreat, a rare but significant setback. Though Vienna did not fall, the siege sent a shockwave of fear throughout Europe, cementing Suleiman's reputation as the most powerful and dangerous monarch in the world, a constant threat at the doorstep of Christendom. Yet, for all his prowess as a conqueror, Suleiman's legacy within his own domains is perhaps even more profoundly rooted in his role as a lawgiver. In the Islamic world, he is known as Kanuni, the lawgiver, a title that speaks to his dedication to justice and administrative order. He undertook a comprehensive review and reorganization of the entire Ottoman legal system, harmonizing secular sultanic law with Islamic religious law, or Sharia. His legal code standardized taxation, land tenure, and criminal punishment across his vast and diverse empire, bringing a new level of consistency and fairness to the administration of justice. This focus on lawful governance created a period of remarkable internal stability and prosperity, allowing trade to flourish and the empire's economy to strengthen. This stability, in turn, provided the foundation for an extraordinary cultural golden age. Under Suleiman's patronage, Ottoman art, literature, and architecture reached their peak. The Sultan himself was an accomplished poet, writing under the pseudonym Muhibbi, or the Affectionate One, but his most visible legacy is etched in the skyline of Istanbul. He commissioned the master architect Mimar Sinan to transform the city, and Sinan responded with a series of breathtaking mosques that redefined Islamic architecture. The crown jewel is the Suleymaniye Mosque, a complex that includes not just a place of worship but schools, a hospital, a public kitchen, and a bathhouse. With its elegant cascading domes and soaring minarets, it was designed to rival and even surpass the Byzantine marvel of the Hagia Sophia, standing as a powerful symbol of Ottoman grandeur and Suleiman's imperial vision. This public image of a majestic and just ruler, however, concealed a private world of intense passion and political intrigue that would ultimately reshape the very structure of the Ottoman court. The center of this drama was a woman known to history as Hurrem Sultan, or the Laughing One. She began her life far from the opulence of Constantinople, born Alexandra Lisowska in Ruthenia, modern-day Ukraine. She was captured by Crimean Tatars during a slave raid and eventually sold into the Ottoman imperial harem. This harem was not merely a sultan's pleasure palace, it was a highly disciplined institution, a training ground for the women who could influence the empire's future, as the mother of a potential heir was a position of immense power. Hurrem's intelligence, charm, and wit captivated Suleiman in a way no other concubine had. She broke centuries of Ottoman tradition, which dictated that once a concubine bore a son, she would no longer share the sultan's bed, devoting herself solely to her child's advancement. Hurrem, however, bore Suleiman multiple children and remained his exclusive companion for the rest of her life. In an even more unprecedented move, Suleiman took the extraordinary step of freeing her from slavery and marrying her in an official ceremony, making her his legal wife. This was a seismic event in Ottoman politics. No sultan had married a woman from the harem since the early days of the empire, and it signaled Hurrem's unique and unassailable position. As Suleiman's wife, Hurrem Sultan wielded influence on a scale never before seen for an Ottoman woman. She moved from the secluded harem into her own apartments adjacent to the sultan's, and she became his most trusted confidante and political advisor. She corresponded directly with kings and queens across Europe, including the King of Poland, engaging in high-level diplomacy. She commissioned massive charitable works, including a mosque complex in Istanbul and public baths in Jerusalem, building her own power base and legacy. Her influence extended to the most critical matter of state, the succession. To ensure the throne would pass to one of her own sons, she was widely believed to have orchestrated the downfall of Suleiman's beloved eldest son and heir apparent, Shahzad Mustafa, who was the son of another concubine. Mustafa was a popular and capable military commander, seen by the powerful Janissary Corps as a worthy successor. His very existence was a direct threat to Hurrem's sons. Through careful manipulation and whispers of treason at court, she and her son-in-law, the Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha, convinced an increasingly paranoid Suleiman that Mustafa was plotting to overthrow him. The tragic result was that Suleiman ordered his own son to be strangled during a military campaign in 1553. This act sent shockwaves through the empire, eliminating a popular heir and clearing the path for Hurrem's son, Selim, to eventually inherit the throne. The mystery that lingers is the precise extent of Hurrem's agency. Was she a masterful Machiavellian puppeteer who coldly engineered the death of a rival? Or was she a fiercely protective mother operating within a brutal system where the alternative to her son's success was almost certain death? A player in a game whose rules she did not make but had to master to survive. Her unprecedented power inevitably bred resentment and dark rumors, with some contemporary ambassadors even accusing her of using poison to eliminate rivals, though there is no solid evidence to support these claims. Hurrem's Sultan shattered the mold, demonstrating that in the Ottoman court, power could be wielded from the private chambers as effectively as from the throne room, leaving a legacy of influence that would set a powerful precedent for the Sultan's mothers who followed her. From the opulent and treacherous court of Suleiman the Magnificent, we now sail westward to a different island kingdom, where a young queen faced threats just as daunting, not from a sultan's army, but from the swirling conspiracies of her own nobility and the looming shadow of a global superpower. When Elizabeth Tudor ascended the English throne in 1558, she inherited a nation teetering on the brink of collapse, torn apart by bitter religious strife between Catholics and Protestants and nearly bankrupt from foreign wars. Her very legitimacy was questioned by many in Europe, who saw her as the illegitimate daughter of the executed Anne Boleyn. Yet, from this precarious beginning, Elizabeth would forge a reign so brilliant it would define an era, becoming the iconic Virgin Queen who presided over England's Golden Age, a period of explosive cultural achievement and newfound national confidence. Her first and most monumental challenge was to heal the deep religious wounds that had fractured England. Her half-sister, Mary I, had earned the nickname Bloody Mary for her violent campaign to restore Catholicism, burning nearly 300 Protestants at the stake. Elizabeth, a Protestant, needed to find a middle path that could unite her divided people without provoking a holy war with the powerful Catholic nations of France and Spain. Her solution was the Elizabethan religious settlement, a masterwork of political and theological finesse. It re-established the Church of England's independence from Rome, with Elizabeth as its supreme governor, a deliberately less provocative title than head of the church used by her father. The settlement was intentionally vague on some doctrinal points, allowing for a broad church that could accommodate moderate Catholics who were willing to pledge their political loyalty to the Queen. This pragmatic approach did not please everyone. Radical Protestants wanted a purer church, and devout Catholics remained loyal to the Pope, but it created a fragile stability that allowed the nation to begin recovering. It was a delicate balancing act that she would have to maintain for her entire life, a constant negotiation between faith and statecraft. This balancing act extended most dramatically into the most personal aspect of her rule, the question of marriage. From the moment she became queen, Parliament and her advisors pleaded with her to marry and produce an heir to secure the Tudor dynasty and prevent another bloody succession crisis. Suitors lined up from across Europe, including her own brother-in-law, Philip II of Spain, who had been married to her sister Mary, and Eric XIV of Sweden. Yet, Elizabeth consistently and masterfully played these proposals against one another, using the prospect of a strategic alliance as a diplomatic tool for decades without ever committing. Her most famous and passionate relationship was with her childhood friend, Robert Dudley, the handsome and ambitious Earl of Leicester. Their deep affection was obvious to the entire court, and many believed he was the one man she truly loved. But marrying him posed immense risks, as an English nobleman choosing Dudley would have enraged other powerful families and created dangerous factions. Furthermore, Dudley was already shrouded in scandal as his wife, Amy Robsart, died under mysterious circumstances from a fall down a staircase, a tragedy that forever tarnished his reputation and made a marriage to the Queen politically impossible. Elizabeth's ultimate decision to never marry at all was a breathtakingly bold political strategy. By remaining the Virgin Queen, she transformed a potential weakness, her childlessness, into a unique source of power. She crafted a public image of herself as married to her nation, and her subjects became her metaphorical children. In a famous speech to Parliament, she declared, "I have already joined myself in marriage to a husband, namely the Kingdom of England." This persona allowed her to maintain her independence and prevent any foreign prince or English lord from usurping her authority. She became Gloriana, a semi-divine figure celebrated in poetry and pageants, her iconic pale face and fiery red wig symbols of ageless purity and strength. The great mystery, of course, is what personal cost this choice exacted. Was her virginity a carefully maintained political facade, or was it a deeply held personal conviction? The truth is likely a complex blend. By refusing to name a successor, she kept every potential heir and their supporters hopeful and loyal to her as the source of all future favor. It was a game of power played with her own life and body as the ultimate chess piece. This perpetual uncertainty about the succession fueled constant danger, making her reign a magnet for plots and assassination attempts. The most serious of these was the Babington Plot of 1586. This intricate conspiracy, orchestrated by a young Catholic nobleman named Anthony Babington, aimed to murder Elizabeth and place her Catholic cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, on the English throne. Mary was a perpetual thorn in Elizabeth's side. As the former Queen of Scotland and a great-granddaughter of Henry VII, she had a strong claim to the English crown and had become a living symbol for every Catholic who wished to see Elizabeth overthrown. For years, Elizabeth had kept Mary under a form of genteel house arrest, refusing to take the drastic step of executing a fellow anointed queen. The Babington Plot, however, was too well documented to ignore. Babington and his co-conspirators foolishly communicated in code, unaware that Elizabeth's brilliant spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, had penetrated their network. Walsingham intercepted the letters which explicitly discussed the plan to kill Elizabeth. He even allowed a secret passage to be built into the plot's letters, ensuring that Mary herself would be implicated. When Mary responded, giving her approval for the assassination, she sealed her own fate. After much agonizing, Elizabeth signed the death warrant. Mary, Queen of Scots, was beheaded in 1587, an act that removed a major threat but also escalated tensions with Catholic Spain to a breaking point. That breaking point came the very next year in the form of the mighty Spanish Armada. Philip II of Spain, once a suitor, had become Elizabeth's greatest enemy, outraged by English piracy against his treasure ships and the execution of Mary, a fellow Catholic monarch. He assembled a colossal fleet of 130 ships, an invasion force intended to transport an army from the Spanish Netherlands to conquer England. The situation appeared dire. England's navy was smaller and its army unprepared, but Elizabeth rose to the occasion with masterful leadership. She personally visited her troops assembled at Tilbury, delivering one of the most rousing speeches in history. Dressed in a silver breastplate over a white gown, she declared, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." Her words galvanized the nation. The English fleet, commanded by figures like Sir Francis Drake, used its smaller, more maneuverable ships and superior long-range guns to harry the Spanish formation in the English Channel. Then a combination of daring English fire ship attacks and a devastating storm. The Protestant wind, as the English saw it, scattered and destroyed the Armada. The victory was seen as a divine endorsement of Elizabeth and her Protestant England, a moment of supreme national triumph that cemented her legend. This newfound confidence and stability provided the fertile ground for an extraordinary cultural explosion. The Elizabethan era became synonymous with the works of William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Edmund Spenser. Theatres like the Globe flourished, and explorers like Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake expanded England's horizons across the Atlantic. Elizabeth's shrewd patronage and the relative peace she maintained after the Armada's defeat allowed a unique English Renaissance to bloom, a legacy of art and literature that has endured for centuries. When she died in 1603, the last of the Tudor monarchs, she left behind a nation that was unified, confident, and poised to become a global power, a far cry from the fractured and impoverished kingdom she had inherited 45 years earlier. The mystery of Elizabeth endures not in a single event, but in the profound contradiction of her life. A woman who wielded absolute power by refusing to share it. A queen who built her legend on a persona of sacrifice, proving that in the Game of Thrones, the most powerful move is sometimes the one you never make. From the island kingdom of Elizabeth, where power was wielded through careful image-making and parliamentary persuasion, we now cross the English Channel to a realm where royal authority reached its most spectacular and unapologetic zenith. In France, a young boy king who had survived the chaos of a noble rebellion known as the Fronde grew up with a singular, burning resolve. He would never again be at the mercy of his own aristocracy. That boy would become Louis XIV, and his reign would not merely define the age, it would become the very blueprint for absolute monarchy in Europe. He adopted the symbol of the sun, and as the Sun King, he believed, like the sun itself, that all power and life in France should radiate from him and him alone. To understand the sheer force of Louis's will, one need only look not at a battlefield but at a palace, about 12 miles southwest of Paris, in what was then a swampy, inconsequential hunting ground. Louis embarked on the most ambitious construction project of the 17th century, the Palace of Versailles. This was far more than a royal residence. It was the ultimate mechanism of control, a gilded cage designed with Machiavellian genius. Before Louis centralized the court at Versailles, the French nobility were powerful figures on their own estates, capable of raising armies and challenging the crown, just as they had during his childhood. Louis's masterstroke was to invite them all to live with him. He transformed the medieval concept of court service into an elaborate, non-stop performance of subservience. Life at Versailles was governed by a rigid, exhausting schedule of rituals known as the lever and coucher, the ceremonial waking and bedding of the king. The highest honor a noble could aspire to was the right to hand the king his shirt. By making such trivialities the pinnacle of social achievement, Louis cleverly reduced France's most powerful warriors to courtiers competing for his favor. They were too consumed with the politics of the bedroom and the ballroom to plot rebellion in the countryside. Every aspect of the palace's design, from the hall of mirrors that reflected his glory to the sprawling gardens that demonstrated his taming of nature, was intended to broadcast a single, undeniable message. The state was Louis, and Louis was the state. Yet, maintaining this dazzling spectacle of power required a fortune, and funding it demanded constant military expansion. Louis XIV's reign was marked by a series of major wars, driven by a desire to secure what he called France's natural frontiers, the Pyrenees, the Alps, and the Rhine River. His powerful army, reformed by his brilliant Minister of War, Louvois, became the envy of Europe. For decades, French might seemed unstoppable. Territories were seized and French culture and language spread across the continent. However, this relentless aggression created a permanent coalition of enemies, including England, the Dutch Republic, and the Habsburg Empire, who united time and again to check his ambition. The wars, particularly the War of the Spanish Succession, which was fought to place his grandson on the throne of Spain, dragged on for years, bleeding the French treasury white and imposing crushing taxes on the peasantry. While the Sun King's glory shone brightly at Versailles, the financial foundations of the nation were cracking, planting the seeds of the discontent that would explode into revolution a century later. Amidst the very public theater of Versailles, however, lies one of history's most enduring and personal mysteries, a story of a prisoner whose identity was so dangerous it had to be erased completely. Sometime in the late 1660s, a man was arrested and incarcerated under the strictest secrecy. He was first held at the fortress of Pignerol and later transferred to the Bastille, but his true prison was his anonymity. He was forced to wear a mask which legend has since romanticized as being made of iron, though historical records suggest it was more likely black velvet. The governor of the Bastille was instructed that if the prisoner ever tried to speak of his identity, he was to be killed immediately. He died in 1703, and his name was scrubbed from all records, his cell walls stripped, and every artifact pertaining to him destroyed. This is the man history knows as the Man in the Iron Mask. The mystery has fueled speculation for centuries. Who was he, and why was his existence such a profound threat to Louis XIV? The most popular theory, famously explored by Alexander Dumas, is that he was Louis's identical twin brother. A second royal heir would have been a catastrophic threat to the doctrine of absolute monarchy, a living challenge to the unique, son-like status of the king. Other theories suggest he was the king's illegitimate older brother, or even the real father of Louis XIV, concealed to hide a scandalous secret about the king's birth. More plausible, though less dramatic, hypotheses point to a high-ranking noble who had committed a grave offense against the state, such as the Italian Count Ercole Mattioli, who double-crossed Louis in a secret treaty negotiation, or a disgraced general who knew too much. The true fascination of the story, however, lies not in finding a definitive answer, but in what it reveals about the Sun King himself. In a reign defined by dazzling public spectacle, the Iron Mask represents the dark underside of absolute power, the terrifying ability of a monarch to not just punish a man, but to utterly obliterate his identity, to make a human being disappear into a silent, anonymous void. It is a chilling reminder that for all the light cast by the sun, its shadow can be absolute. While the Sun King was perfecting the art of absolute power within the gilded halls of Versailles, a very different kind of monarch was emerging in what many Europeans considered the distant, backward fringes of the continent. In Russia, a young giant of a man standing nearly 7 feet tall was possessed by a vision so radical it would tear his ancient kingdom from its medieval roots and thrust it, kicking and screaming, into the modern world. This was Peter Romanov, the first to be granted the title the Great, and his reign was a violent, passionate, and often brutal revolution from above, a one-man crusade to drag a reluctant Russia into the Western fold. Peter's obsession with the West was forged in fire and humiliation. As a young Tsar, he witnessed the military and technological superiority of Europe firsthand. A pivotal moment came when he attempted to capture the Black Sea port of Azov from the Ottoman Empire. His army, a relic of a bygone era, was defeated not by the Ottomans but by its own inadequacy. It lacked modern siege engines, a competent navy, and the disciplined training of European forces. This failure ignited a burning determination in Peter. He would not simply imitate the West, he would master its secrets. In 1697, he embarked on a journey unprecedented for a Russian autocrat, the 18-month Grand Embassy. But Peter did not travel as a Tsar. He went incognito under the name Peter Mikhailov, a lowly sergeant in the delegation. This was not a mere holiday, it was an intelligence-gathering mission on a colossal scale. In Holland, he worked as a simple shipwright in the docks of Zondam, getting his hands calloused and covered in pitch as he learned the art of building modern warships. He visited England, studying its naval architecture and even attending a session of Parliament, observing the debates with a mixture of curiosity and disdain for such a seemingly chaotic form of governance. He hired hundreds of European experts, engineers, naval officers, doctors, and craftsmen, luring them back to Russia with promises of high pay and prestige. For Peter, knowledge was not an abstract pursuit. It was a tangible tool to be acquired, reverse-engineered, and implemented with relentless force. Upon his return, this new knowledge became a weapon wielded against the traditions of old Russia. His reforms were sweeping, profound, and often shockingly personal. He viewed the long, flowing beards and traditional kaftans of the Russian boyars, the noble class, as symbols of the backwardness he despised. He instituted a beard tax and personally shaved the beards of his horrified courtiers at a banquet, decreeing that all men, except priests and peasants, must adopt Western dress. He reformed the calendar to align with the European Julian system, moving the new year from September to January. He forced the secluded women of the aristocracy to emerge from their harems or women's quarters and participate in social gatherings with men, a practice he called assemblies, which were met with stunned resistance. The most significant transformation was of the military. He abolished the old, unreliable Streltsy Corps, the elite musketeers who had opposed him, and built a modern, professional standing army based on the European model, conscripting peasants for lifelong service and outfitting them with standardized uniforms and flintlock muskets. He poured immense resources into creating a navy from nothing, understanding that maritime power was the key to becoming a major European player. To fund this whirlwind of change, he overhauled the entire government, creating a new administrative system of colleges to replace the chaotic old prikazy. And he even introduced a soul tax on every male peasant, further binding the vast majority of the population in serfdom to support his grand ambitions. The ultimate physical manifestation of his westernizing dream was a city built from scratch on a swamp. After securing victory in the Great Northern War against Sweden and gaining a foothold on the Baltic Sea, Peter gazed upon the desolate, marshy delta of the Neva River. It was a hostile, flood-prone landscape, but for Peter it was a blank canvas. Here he would build his window to Europe, a new capital that would turn its back on the old, Asiatic-influenced Moscow and face westward, St. Petersburg. The project was an act of breathtaking hubris and human suffering. Tens of thousands of serfs and Swedish prisoners of war were conscripted to drain the swamps, drive piles into the unstable ground, and haul the stone for the new buildings. Conditions were horrific. Disease, malnutrition, and accidents claimed an estimated tens of thousands of lives, leading to the city being grimly dubbed the city built on bones. Yet Peter's iron will prevailed. He designed a city with wide, geometrically straight avenues and canals reminiscent of Amsterdam, and he commanded the nobility to build lavish stone houses there at their own expense. The magnificent Peter and Paul Fortress and the Admiralty shipyards rose from the bog. St. Petersburg was more than a capital. It was a three-dimensional declaration that Russia was now a European power, a permanent bridge to the West that Peter had fought his entire life to construct. This relentless drive to transform Russia, however, cast a long and dark shadow within his own family. The greatest threat to Peter's life's work came not from a foreign enemy, but from his own son and heir, Alexei. From a young age, a deep chasm grew between the father and son. Alexei was everything Peter despised: timid, pious, intellectually inclined, and deeply conservative. He saw his father's reforms as a violent assault on the traditional Russian way of life and the Orthodox faith. He sympathized with the old boyars who longed for the days before the beard tax and the Western assemblies. Peter, frustrated by his son's lack of interest in military and state affairs, repeatedly pressured him to become more involved, even threatening to disinherit him if he did not embrace his destiny. Fearing his father's wrath, Alexei made a fateful decision in 1716. He fled Russia, seeking refuge at the court of the Habsburg monarch in Vienna. For Peter, this was not just a personal betrayal, it was a political catastrophe. His heir, the future Tsar, was now a pawn in the hands of a potential enemy, a living symbol around which all domestic opposition to Peter's reforms could rally. Alexei was eventually coaxed back to Russia with promises of forgiveness, but upon his return he was arrested and subjected to a brutal investigation. Peter personally oversaw the torture of his son's friends and confidants to extract evidence of a conspiracy. Under torture, Alexei confessed to wishing for his father's death. He was condemned to death for treason. The official record states that Alexei died in his prison cell in the Peter and Paul fortress on June 26, 1718, from a stroke brought on by the shock of his sentence. But the circumstances are deeply suspicious. It is widely believed he died from the injuries sustained during his own torture, which was authorized by his father. Whether Peter directly ordered his execution or simply created the conditions that led to his death remains one of the most chilling mysteries of his reign. It was the ultimate tragic price of his ambition. In his quest to build a modern Russia, Peter the Great was willing to sacrifice even his own son, a stark and horrifying testament to the belief that the destiny of a nation could outweigh the bonds of blood. From the brutal, transformative force of Peter the Great, we now arrive at the court of a ruler who would continue his westernizing project with a very different style, proving that absolute power could be wielded with both an iron fist and a cultivated mind. The story of Catherine II of Russia is one of the most remarkable in history, a tale of a minor German princess with no drop of Russian blood in her veins who, through sheer intellect, determination, and a healthy dose of cunning, seized the throne and became known to posterity as Catherine the Great. Her reign would be a paradox of enlightened ideals and autocratic practice, a period of vast imperial expansion and glittering cultural achievement, all shadowed by whispers of conspiracy and scandal that have fascinated historians for centuries. Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst was born in the provincial German town of Stettin in 1729. Her path to power began not through ambition, but through a strategic marriage arranged by her ambitious mother and the Russian Empress Elizabeth, who was seeking a suitable bride for her nephew and heir, the Grand Duke Peter. Upon arriving in Russia, the young Sophie understood that her survival depended on complete assimilation. She converted from Lutheranism to Russian Orthodoxy, taking the name Catherine, and devoted herself to mastering the Russian language, its customs, and its complex court politics. This was a stark contrast to her husband, Peter, who remained emotionally and culturally attached to his native Germany, openly admiring Russia's enemy, Frederick the Great of Prussia, and showing a childish disdain for Russian traditions. The marriage was a disaster from the start, an emotionally barren union between two incompatible people. While Peter played with toy soldiers, Catherine embarked on a rigorous program of self-education, devouring the works of French Enlightenment philosophers like Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Diderot. She was not merely reading for pleasure, she was studying the science of government, forming her own political philosophy, and quietly building a network of supporters within the disaffected Russian elite who saw in her the intelligence and strength that their future Tsar so clearly lacked. The moment of truth arrived with the death of Empress Elizabeth in 1762. Peter ascended the throne as Peter III, and his brief reign was a catastrophe. He abruptly ended Russia's participation in the 7 Years' War, a conflict in which Russian troops had been on the verge of crushing his idol, Frederick the Great, saving Prussia from certain defeat. This move was seen as a national humiliation and a betrayal of Russian blood and treasure. He alienated the powerful Orthodox Church by seizing its lands and mocking its rituals. More dangerously, he alienated the palace guards, the very institution that served as the kingmaker in Russian politics. After just 6 months on the throne, Peter's unpopularity had reached a boiling point. It was at this critical juncture that Catherine made her move. With the support of her current lover, Grigory Orlov, and his brothers, who were officers in the guards, she went to the barracks and rallied the regiments to her cause. Dressed in a guardsman's uniform, she declared herself the rightful ruler, presenting a narrative that Peter was unfit and that she was acting to save Russia. The coup was bloodless and astonishingly swift. Peter III was forced to abdicate and was taken to a remote estate at Ropsha. A few days later, the official announcement was made. He had died of a severe attack of hemorrhoidal colic. No one believed it. This sudden death is the first and most persistent mystery of Catherine's reign. Did she order the assassination of her husband? The historical evidence is circumstantial but overwhelming. The man who likely delivered the fatal blow was Alexei Orlov, brother of her lover, who was present at Ropsha. In a letter to Catherine after the fact, Alexei Orlov wrote in a panicked tone, describing a drunken brawl during which Peter had been killed, implying it was not premeditated but had spiraled out of control. Whether this was a genuine account or a cover story devised after the fact may never be known. What is certain is that Catherine benefited enormously from Peter's death. A living, deposed Tsar would have been a permanent focal point for rebellion, a threat to her fragile hold on power. His removal, however it occurred, secured her position. She never punished the Orlovs, and she never conducted a public inquiry. She ascended the throne as the unquestioned autocrat, but the shadow of her husband's death would follow her forever, providing ample ammunition for her enemies to paint her as a ruthless usurper. Once in power, Catherine embarked on a reign that would last 34 years. She proved to be a tireless and effective administrator, deeply influenced by the Enlightenment thinkers she so admired. She corresponded with Voltaire for over a decade, exchanging letters filled with philosophical discussions and mutual flattery. He called her the Star of the North. She convened a legislative commission in 1767, composed of delegates from across her vast empire, and personally wrote a lengthy instruction for them, a document filled with progressive ideas about justice, equality before the law, and the need to abolish torture. It was a radical document for its time, so much so that it was censored in France. Yet, here lies the central contradiction of her rule. The instruction was largely theoretical. The commission failed to produce a new law code, and when faced with a massive peasant uprising led by the Cossack Emelian Pugachev, a revolt that shook the very foundations of her state, Catherine responded not with enlightenment but with brutal suppression. Pugachev was executed in a gruesome public spectacle, and serfdom, the institution that oppressed the vast majority of her subjects, was actually expanded and strengthened, with hundreds of thousands of free peasants given as property to her loyal nobles as rewards for service. Her enlightened ideals consistently gave way to the pragmatic necessities of maintaining the support of the landed aristocracy, the bedrock of her power. Her achievements in foreign policy, however, faced no such contradictions and were spectacularly successful. Under her rule, the Russian Empire expanded dramatically at the expense of two decaying powers, the Ottoman Empire and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Through a series of victorious wars, she secured the northern coast of the Black Sea, founded the vital port of Sevastopol as the base for her new Black Sea fleet, and annexed the Crimean Khanate, a goal that had eluded Russian rulers for centuries. To the west, she masterminded the three partitions of Poland, in concert with Prussia and Austria, effectively erasing a sovereign nation from the map and pushing Russia's borders deep into Central Europe. By the end of her reign, Russia had acquired over 200,000 square miles of new territory, establishing itself as a dominant and permanent force in European affairs. This imperial expansion was matched by an equally ambitious project of cultural patronage. She was a voracious collector of art, purchasing entire collections from across Europe, which formed the core of the world-famous Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. She founded schools, promoted the development of Russian literature and theater, and transformed the Winter Palace and its surroundings into a breathtaking monument to imperial splendor. It is this very public life of power and culture that became intertwined with the private life that fueled countless salacious rumors. Catherine was a woman of great passion, and after her disastrous marriage, she took a series of 12 official favorites or lovers. Her enemies, particularly in Western Europe, seized upon this to create a monstrous caricature of her as a nymphomaniac, spreading vile and fabricated stories about her alleged sexual appetites. The truth, while still scandalous for a female monarch of the time, was far more nuanced. Her relationships were not merely for pleasure, they were deeply political. She elevated these men to high positions, but she maintained absolute control. Each favorite was carefully vetted, and the relationships followed a strict protocol. When a favorite fell out of favor, he was generously pensioned off with estates and serfs, ensuring a smooth and peaceful transition. The most famous of these, Grigory Potemkin, was not just a lover but arguably her greatest political partner. After their romantic relationship ended, they maintained an intense and loyal correspondence, and he became the mastermind behind the colonization and development of her southern conquests, the so-called Potemkin villages, a term that originated from the false front settlements he allegedly erected to impress her during a tour, though historians debate the extent of this deception. Catherine's management of her personal life was in its own way as calculated and effective as her management of the state. She used her favorites as trusted advisors, rewarding loyalty and talent, and never allowing any one man to challenge her ultimate authority. In the end, Catherine the Great remains an enigma, a German usurper who became more Russian than the natives, an enlightened philosopher who upheld serfdom, a woman whose personal life was used to undermine her political achievements, and one of the most effective and powerful monarchs to ever rule, leaving behind an empire and a legacy that defies simple judgment. Our journey now takes us from the palaces of Europe to the heart of West Africa, to an empire whose wealth was so staggering it would redefine the very meaning of riches. While kings and queens across the world built their power on land and legions, one ruler's authority was measured in a more universal currency, gold. His name was Mansa Musa, the 10th Mansa, or Emperor of the Mali Empire, and his fortune was so vast that many historians consider him the wealthiest individual to have ever lived. His reign in the early 14th century was not just a period of imperial expansion. It was a dazzling display of economic power that resonated across continents and centuries. Mansa Musa's fame rests primarily on one epic event, his Hajj, the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca, which he undertook in the year 1324. This was not a quiet, spiritual journey. It was a procession of imperial might designed to announce Mali's arrival on the world stage. The caravan that set out from the capital of Niamey was of a scale almost impossible to fathom. Contemporary accounts describe a retinue of 60,000 people, including 12,000 servants alone, each dressed in fine Persian silk. 500 slaves, it is said, walked at the front of the column, each carrying a staff of solid gold weighing several pounds. The emperor himself rode at the center, preceded by hundreds of baggage camels, each laden with hundreds of pounds of gold dust. But the most astonishing part of this spectacle was Mansa Musa's generosity. As he traveled through cities like Cairo, he distributed his wealth with an open hand, giving vast sums of gold to the poor, to scholars, and to officials he encountered. He spent and donated so much gold along his route that he inadvertently caused an economic crisis. The massive, sudden influx of gold into the economies of Egypt and the Hejaz devalued the metal itself, causing a decade-long depression in the region as prices for goods skyrocketed. It was an unintended consequence of such breathtaking generosity that it would be talked about for the next 12 years, with chroniclers from Spain to the Middle East struggling to find the words to describe the wealth they had witnessed. This legendary wealth was not conjured from thin air. It was the product of a strategic and geographical masterstroke. The Mali Empire sat squarely atop one of history's most lucrative commercial networks, the trans-Saharan trade routes. For centuries, camel caravans, sometimes numbering thousands of animals, had crossed the vast desert, linking the Mediterranean world of North Africa with the resource-rich lands south of the Sahara. Mali controlled the trade in three key commodities: salt, which was mined in the northern deserts and was as precious as gold in the humid south for preserving food; enslaved people, a tragic but central pillar of the medieval economy; and most importantly, gold. The empire held a virtual monopoly on the gold fields of West Africa, particularly the Bambouk and Bure fields. Gold was so abundant in Mali that it was said the emperor's officials would only trade it for an equal weight in salt, a testament to its relative commonness within his borders. By taxing every ounce of goods that passed through its territory, the Mali Empire grew fabulously wealthy, turning trade routes into rivers of gold that flowed directly into the imperial treasury. Mansa Musa understood that true power was about more than just accumulating treasure. It was about building a legacy that would endure. Upon his return from Mecca, he embarked on an ambitious program of urban development and cultural patronage, transforming his empire into a center of Islamic learning and architecture. He brought back with him esteemed scholars, architects, and poets from the Arab world, most notably the Andalusian poet and architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, who is credited with introducing the distinct Sudano-Sahelian architectural style to the region. It was under Mansa Musa's direction that the legendary city of Timbuktu was transformed from a seasonal trading post into a permanent metropolis of global significance. He commissioned the construction of the Jingraba Mosque, a magnificent structure made of mud, brick, and wood that could hold 2,000 worshippers and which still stands today. More importantly, he founded the University of Sankore, which attracted the finest minds in Africa and the Middle East, becoming a renowned center for the study of astronomy, mathematics, law, and medicine. Its libraries overflowed with thousands of manuscripts, making Timbuktu one of the great intellectual capitals of the medieval world, a beacon of knowledge in the heart of West Africa. This golden age, however, presents us with a compelling historical mystery. While we know the Mali Empire was vast, stretching from the Atlantic coast deep into the interior, the precise boundaries of Mansa Musa's domain are still a subject of debate. Contemporary maps, like the famous Catalan Atlas of 1375, depict him holding a large gold nugget, seated on a golden throne in a land of plenty, but they offer only a vague outline of his territory. The empire was so large and administratively complex that its full extent and the exact locations of its major cities beyond Timbuktu and Gao remain partially lost to time. This leads to an even more tantalizing question: where did all the gold actually come from? While the known gold fields were immensely productive, some accounts and local oral traditions speak of legendary cities of gold that supplied the Mansas with their seemingly endless wealth. The most famous of these is the city of Wangara, a place so rich that its inhabitants were said to trade gold for salt in silent, unattended exchanges, leaving their gold on a riverbank for merchants to take, replacing it with an equivalent amount of salt. Was Wangara a real, yet-to-be-discovered archaeological site, a specific mine, or simply a metaphorical term for the gold-producing region as a whole? The mystery endures, inviting modern archaeologists to peel back the sands of the Sahara in search of the physical remnants of an empire whose wealth was so immense that it temporarily broke the economy of the known world, and whose cultural achievements laid a foundation that would inspire generations long after its gold had faded into legend. And so our grand tour through the halls of power comes to a close. From the stone pillars of Hammurabi's Babylon to the gilded court of the Sun King at Versailles, we have stood in the presence of 25 individuals who did not merely wear a crown, they wielded it as a tool to reshape the world. What an astonishing spectrum of power we have witnessed, We met the lawgivers like Hammurabi and Justinian, who sought to impose order through written codes that would echo for millennia. We saw the empire builders, from Cyrus the Great's revolutionary tolerance to Genghis Khan's terrifying whirlwind of conquest, whose sheer ambition redrew the maps of continents. We encountered cultural icons like Ashoka, who turned from violence to preach compassion, and Charlemagne, who sparked a renaissance of learning from the ashes of the Dark Ages. We've been captivated by the tragic figures whose stories are etched in pathos: Boudica, whose righteous fury was ultimately quelled, and Cleopatra, who chose her own death over a conqueror's triumph. We've seen masters of strategy and survival like Elizabeth I, who played a continent against itself, and Wu Zetian, who climbed from concubine to emperor in a system designed to keep women down. And we've unraveled the mysteries that cling to them still: the lost tombs of Alexander and Attila, the vanished colony of Eric the Red, the enigmatic fate of the man in the Iron Mask. Each ruler, in their own way, grappled with the same fundamental forces: the hunger for glory, the weight of divine right, the brutal calculus of control, and the relentless, haunting desire to leave a mark that would not fade with time. What connects a pharaoh like Hatshepsut to a tsarina like Catherine the Great, beyond the centuries and cultures that separate them? It is the human spirit operating at its most ambitious scale. It is the understanding that true power is not just about commanding armies, but about commanding minds through law, through faith, through art, and sometimes through fear. They all understood that legacy is the final conquest, the one battle that continues long after the ruler has turned to dust. They built in stone, they wrote in law, they forged nations and shattered others, all in pursuit of a name that would be remembered. As we step back from these monumental lives, we are left with a final thought. History is not just a record of what happened. It is a conversation with these figures who, for a brief moment, held the destiny of millions in their hands. Their stories challenge us, inspire us, and sometimes horrify us, but they never fail to remind us of the incredible potential and the profound responsibility of concentrated power. So we turn the question over to you. After this journey through the annals of the mighty, which ruler's story resonated with you the most? Was it the strategic genius of Augustus, the unexpected tolerance of Cyrus, the defiant spirit of Boudica, or the cultural transformation of Peter the Great? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We are truly curious to hear which figure captured your imagination. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the mysteries of the past, be sure to subscribe for more journeys into the shadows of history. For the stories of the powerful are never truly finished. With every new discovery, every reinterpretation, we uncover another layer of their complex legacies, reminding us that the echoes of their reigns are still shaping our world.